Back in July, a good friend and coworker of mine passed away suddenly. We will call her Jane. Jane was in her early 60s, which is a big age gap in comparison to me, but she was like a mother figure to me. She never had kids and always considered me a daughter. I've known her for about 4 years prior to her passing. The day she got admitted to the hospital, nobody at work knew. She didn't show up for her shift, so we sensed something was wrong. Her landlord came into the store that day and told us what happened, that he saw her car sitting in the driveway but knew she works on Wednesdays, so he thought that was odd. He knocked on the door and called her phone, but there was no answer to either. He then knew something was wrong, so he phoned 911. They found her on the couch, unconscious. She had suffered from multiple strokes. When the landlord told us this, I immediately went to the hospital along with my other colleagues. She has no kids, parents, or siblings. I knew she had a boyfriend, but they didn't live together. I asked her landlord if the boyfriend knew, and he said no. I figured the best thing to do was get in contact with someone close to her. The people at the hospital kept asking me if I knew anyone they could contact. Any family at all. I told them no, but I knew that she had a boyfriend named Steve. The next day I was off work, but I got a call from my colleague saying Steve called the store because he was worried about Jane. He hadn't heard from her, so he wanted to call and see if she was working. My colleagues told Steve he better give me a call because they didn't want to be the ones to tell me the news. Shortly after I hang up with the colleague, I get a call from Steve. I told him what happened and he sounded very worried and asked what hospital she was in. I told him and I mentioned that I would also be going to the hospital that day to see her. When I get there, Steve arrives shortly after. Now, I know everybody grieves differently, but he was acting very odd. I was crying like a baby. I'm very emotional though, and he seemed cold and distant. Barely stood next to her. Also, to my understanding, they were dating for 12 plus years. They used to live together, but Jane moved out on their own place. When the nurses came in to talk with Steve, they asked him a bunch of questions, and they asked him things like if she had any pets, where she worked, where she lived, and her employment status. He got all the questions wrong. He said she lived in a completely different city that's almost an hour away. He said she had no pets, but she had 2 cats that were everything to her. Everybody at work knew she had cats because she talked about them nonstop. He also said that she was part-time, but she was actually full-time. The nurse was so thrown off by this and thought it was strange how a long-term boyfriend knew nothing about his girlfriend after being together that long. The nurse even told me in private that she got bad vibes from him because of how weird he was acting towards the whole situation. During this hospital visit, the landlord ended up showing up and Steve got into a huge argument with him. He asked who the heck he was and didn't even know Jane was renting. He thought she moved into her late parents' house after she moved out from his place. The landlord said he wasn't going to give any information to Steve and stayed quiet. After he left, the landlord told me very, very concerning things. I was so emotional at the time, but now I think back on it, I'm like, what the heck? The landlord had told me that he and Jane had known each other for a long time and that Jane knew that he had properties he was renting out. So she asked him if she could please rent one because she needed to get out of Steve's house. She told him that Steve was crazy and nuts and that she was worried he would hurt her because he made several threatening remarks. So the landlord offered one of his homes for her to rent, which is for the house the 911 found her at. This information was a shock to me, but like I said at the time, I was so emotional and wasn't thinking like how I would now. During the whole time Jane was in the hospital, Steve would text me and ask how she was doing, if I was there and he wasn't, and vice versa. Nothing out of the ordinary. The hospital got a hold of Jane's family in another state and they made the decision to take her off life support since the damage from the stroke was so severe. Steve called me and said he is a mess and so distraught. He asked me if I could please be a support system for him and keep in touch because he felt like his world was tearing apart. I told him yes and that if he ever needed anything he should call. He began texting me almost every single day, sometimes multiple times a day. Like I said at first when she was in the hospital, I appreciated the texts because they were updates on her condition. But after that, I felt like the texting should be minimal to none at all anymore. I didn't know him at all other than Jane told me about him sometimes. But I felt bad at the same time because I know grieving is such a hard thing to go through, so I wrote back but kept it short. The text started going from things like, "When do you think her service will be?" which I didn't mind, but they were just getting weird. And he was asking me about my day, if I was working, or just things that were off topic. I didn't mind speaking to him if it pertained to Jane or her service, but I was not going to text him about other personal things. I stopped responding to him eventually. When Jane's service approached, Steve was there. At the end of it, Steve said his goodbyes to everybody, and then when he saw me, he said in a low voice, "The next time I text you, please respond back to me." My coworker who was just next to me heard this and thought it was very strange, and I didn't respond and left. Later as the days go on, I start getting more texts from him. I stopped responding completely. After a while, I got annoyed from this and texted him saying that I understand he is grieving, but but that the texts were not about Jane and they were too personal. I wasn't interested in speaking to him anymore about this kind of stuff, and even told him my boyfriend does not want me to text him anymore as of today. He just said okay, and I actually didn't hear from him for quite a bit of time. This was until a few days ago. I was at work and Steve came in through the doors. He said hello to all my coworkers and asked them how they were doing. He saw me and tried talking to me, but luckily I was with the customer, so he ended up leaving. Then just today, the same thing happened. He came in and started talking to everybody at my counter. He saw me, but again, I was helping someone, so he left. Every time he comes into the store, he doesn't buy anything either. I'm actually pretty concerned at this point. I haven't really told anybody at work the full story because I've tried to at one point, and I feel like they were on his side, saying he is just grieving and needs somebody to talk to. I've questioned if I'm overreacting at this point or if I was rude to Steve. I don't know, what do you guys think? My wife and I travel often, city to city, and at one point we settled down in Vegas for a few months. There was one night we were arguing after work, headed towards Henderson, city outside Vegas. Lots of isolated streets out that way. I was sitting reclined back in the passenger seat when we ran over something and the tire definitely popped. My wife got out to check and confirmed it. Within seconds, a woman in a very nice car pulls up behind us. I saw she was a woman and I lay back in the seat, still mad, still stubborn, and figuring she was just checking on my wife, assuming she was alone. The woman said that she had a brother-in-law with a tow truck and he could definitely tow the car free of charge to a shop. My wife asked why she was being so kind, and she said something like, "We sisters have to stick together, I'm helping you out." She then got back in the car and my wife told me that she was going to follow us with her hazards on to this empty and dark parking lot in front of some grocery store nearby to get us out of the road. I still didn't think this was weird at all. My wife was very confident this woman was genuine and really wanted to help. So we pulled into the parking lot and my wife got out. I'm still lying back and this woman doesn't even know I'm here yet. She starts talking to my wife about how she changed her life within a year. She could put her on to what she does. It seems believable and she looked very nice and her car was definitely expensive. My wife keeps insisting she can just call a tow truck and she felt bad that she was taking time from her and we could afford it. The woman kept insisting her brother-in-law was coming and be patient, he really doesn't mind. She even offered at some point to drive my wife around the area looking for a shop that was open, but my wife had already Googled some places. She told her that's smart and they kept talking. No suspicion, honestly. She then starts asking my wife why she's in Vegas. We had New York plates. She says for adventure and doing something new. The woman asked if she had family she's close to or a boyfriend. She could introduce her to some of her friends to help her get her well acquainted or whatever. She motions over to me and says, "Well, I have a husband," and the woman looked like a deer in the headlights. I politely waved. She leans over and finally sees me, stares for a few seconds, and immediately gets in her car. Instantly. I never saw somebody look at me like that, like she had to get away from me. She tells my wife that she has to go to a store that's opening soon. Her brother-in-law is taking too long, but he will be there in an hour at least. She told her not to leave and he'll come help. 1 hour. Okay, honey. My wife was confused and tried to ask if she'd be there too, but the woman just drove off. We knew then that something was wrong with that situation. We both just stared at each other in confusion. I have no idea still why that happened. We called the towing company and fixed the car within 40 minutes and drove back to wait because my wife was persistent in believing the woman was going to come back or her brother-in-law would, and she wanted to let them know that she didn't need their help. I told her I didn't think they were coming back, but we did wait. No one came for nearly 2 hours before we drove home. I did some research and found out a lot of traffickers use women because they seem more trustworthy. Vegas obviously has a large presence of these things as well. The woman was almost desperate to keep my wife there. It was all so weird. Now when I look back, it seems more obvious that there was danger there, but in the moment, the woman was so charming and endearing that it seemed like she was genuinely trying to help. I still don't know, but I'm pretty sure she ran off because I was there and she didn't anticipate a man to be there. This is a true story. God is my witness. I'm not making it up. I'm 57 years old now. This is a memory that never goes away and never fades. In 1986, I stopped in Topeka, Kansas on my way back from working in Yellowstone National Park for the summer. My friend had also just graduated from high school a few years before and had moved to Topeka with his parents. I stayed about a week. His parents invited me to stay an extra day for their family reunion before I headed back home. We drove way out into the country for their family reunion, and it was in his old beater car and spent all day with his extended family. In the late afternoon, we made our way back to Topeka and his old beater car with the broken gas gauge. We ran out of gas. He said we were probably 6 or 7 miles from the nearest gas station. Pre-cell phone, mind you. We were trying to figure out what to do when suddenly a van with no windows pulls over and asks us if we need help. When you're young, you think these things just miraculously happen to you, maybe even for you. When you're older, you know better. We tell him we ran out of gas. A friendly enough man offers to take us to the nearest gas station. We get in the van to discover there are a total of 3 men in the vehicle. There are no seats in the back, and we are just sitting on the floor of what appears to be a work-tight, beat-up, older model white van when we clearly hear the men discussing doing us harm. The driver says he knows a good place to go. The other man in the passenger seat eyeing me agrees he's in and nods approval. Only one man sitting nearest us says he's not in and doesn't want to be involved in this at all. But he's got a baby now and he's not cool with this. But he doesn't want any part of it. The driver and passenger seat rider said something under their breaths I couldn't hear. There was an angry silence while the driver thought this was over. In my mind, I was praying one word: help. My mind felt like I was stuttering thoughts. Part of me was in denial and another part in shock. Fear hadn't even set in yet. Just like a jolt to the system of an unreal horror happening to somebody else because an hour ago I was completely safe without a care in the world. And now the absurd idea of somebody assaulting me. Yeah, I was acutely aware that this and murdering us both were what they would do and leaving us somewhere nobody would find us. Those things were flipping through my mind. Have you ever been to Kansas? Lots of lonely, forsaken, desolate roads to nowhere. If at this point the third guy changed his mind or simply said, just let him out first, I wouldn't be sharing this with you right now. They stopped talking to each other and they had never spoken to us at all from the moment we entered the van. My friend and I didn't speak to each other. We barely looked at each other. We were afraid, and I could hear the clanging rattle-trap van noises and the tires on the road. I saw my friend flexing as if to warn me he would fight to defend himself while they were discussing where they would take us. Everything felt surreal, but the guy in the back, that guy said no. And just like that, the driver pulled over and the guy in the back opened up the door and let us out, and it was over. The air smelled somehow fragile and tainted. The ground looked different, like I couldn't quite trust it. My friend looked as shaken as I felt. We had survived a close encounter with shark-like predators. The darkest of evil. I looked at the gas station in the late afternoon, waning sunset just before dark. That gas station had transformed itself into a beacon of shining light. A safe haven of shelter and safety, and I knew once we got into that gas station that there was no way I would walk back to the car. The white van with no windows pulling away from us felt surreal. Like looking at it might give it the power to suck us up into its vacuum of ill intent. Today, I can still see that van pulling away, a sort of image from a nightmare that had crossed over into my waking reality. We moved into a house in the country about 4 months ago. Since we'd previously lived in an apartment, that means we needed to buy a lawnmower. Instead of spending $200 plus on a lawnmower when we have to move in a few years, we decided to hire somebody to cut our grass. Initially, we went with a guy that my fiance used to work with, but $65 every 2 weeks starts to add up, and I was looking for something cheaper. That brings me to Charles. Charles posted in my Facebook classified that he was looking for some lawns to cut this weekend and had a reputable company, so I sent him a message. Initially, Charles came off as nice. He asked for my address so he could stop by and give me an estimate. After stopping by my house, he sent me a message saying, "Damn, you got a big porch." I told him my off days, but he assured me I didn't have to be home. I told him to come Wednesday. Wednesday morning, he messaged me, "Are you home?" I said no. 3 hours later, "Are you home yet?" I told him no, I won't be home till after 8. Charles then informed me that his tire had a flat and he would come tomorrow. Thursday, first thing in the morning, he messaged me, "Will you be home today?" I told him no. He messages back a few hours later, "Hey, are you home?" "No. I told you I wouldn't be home all day. Are you still coming out?" He then told me his truck broke down. He was sending messages like, "Please don't be upset with me, sweetheart." At this point, I was getting really creeped out. I told him just to come tomorrow. Friday, it's actually my off day, but I woke up and left the house for the day. He messages me, "Hey, I'm coming. You're off today, right?" I said, "Yeah, but I'm not home." "When will you be home?" "I don't know." He messaged me later saying, "Sorry, babe. I was loading the equipment onto my truck and it fell and broke. Maybe I can come tomorrow." At this point, I was really creeped out and I told him, "Never mind, I'm going to find somebody else." Saturday, I get off work around 4 or 5 and check my phone and find multiple messages from him saying that he has cut my grass and I need to come home and give him the money. I told him, "No, I'll cash app it to you." He started getting really irate and saying that I need to give him the cash now. I told him I would give him the money after I got home and saw the grass was cut. I was honestly really worried he would be waiting at my house, so I got a friend to drive home behind me. He wasn't there and I sent him the money and I thought that was the end of it. Fast forward to about 2 months later, I'm on the phone with my fiance as I drive to class and he tells me he has to get off the phone because there's somebody walking down our driveway. I asked what he meant and he said there was a man walking around in our driveway and front yard. After I got to class, he texted me telling me it was just a man who had come by to promote his lawn care business. I didn't think anything about it as it had been 2 months, but later that night I got home and saw a business card laying on my counter with the name of the man who had been messaging me earlier. I called my fiance Mike at work and asked how the guy had been acting. He said Charles seemed genuinely surprised that a man had come out and asked if he lived alone. I asked Mike if the man had stopped at any other houses and he replied, "Now that I think about it, I don't think so. After he left our house, he just left." Mike said he seemed really desperate to help around the house and offered to cut the lawn, fix our porch, remove any trash or scrap metal we had around the house, and then asked if we had pests such as bats in our attic or anything. That especially freaked me out as we do have a bat problem and I had previously posted about it on Facebook. Mike then said that was really weird was Charles was very freaked out about the dog. He heard Max barking from inside and started asking a lot of questions like, is he big? Does he stay outside or inside? Does he ever go outside or does he stay inside completely, and how big is he? Is he nice? Mike chalked it up to him being scared of dogs. He gave him a brief tour of the outside of the house and then Charles got in his truck and left. I then told Mike that this was the same guy who had been messaging me earlier in the year and Mike began to freak out. He said that Charles had asked a lot of really specific questions about who all lived here, how long they had lived here, where they were at the time. He said he tried to brush them off, but Charles seemed really insistent on knowing if Mike was the only one in the house. Before he left, Mike specifically asked him if he had cut the lawn here before or something and was maybe thinking of the last owners, but Charles told him, "No, I just happened to be out this way and thought I'd promote my business in the neighborhood." The worst part, I had taken my fiance's car to work that day, which means my car was in the driveway when Charles dropped by. He thought I was home alone. I didn't contact the police because I thought I might be overreacting. This all happened 2 days ago and I really hope I never have to see him again. So back in January, my boyfriend and I celebrated our first anniversary. We went out to a really nice restaurant, got all dressed up, the works. I gifted him a jar full of 52 different pieces of paper with different things I loved about him, one for each week we'd been together. He brought these into the restaurant so we could read them while we waited for our food. People loved this. I guess most of the people in there were older and thought we were adorable, so we kept having people send us free appetizers and such. At a table behind us, there was a large party, clearly drunk and eating dinner. Most of them were around 50 or 60, with the exception being a very old lady with a walker. Sitting at this table is an older man who halfway through our dinner comes over to our table and sits down and starts making conversation with us. He tells us that he and his wife, he gestures vaguely to the table, finds us both very attractive and would we like to join them for the after party. We can't tell if he's joking as he points out the very old lady and says she'll be partying with them as well. My boyfriend and I laugh politely, obviously, but we really just want to have our dinner in peace. He then offers to buy us a bottle of champagne to celebrate our anniversary, which is when I break it to him that we are underage, but thank you. So instead, he insists on buying a dessert and then goes back to his table. You would think that it stopped here. When the desserts get delivered, the man comes back over to our table and sits down again. He once again asks us if we would like to join him and his wife at the after party, and we once again decline. He then stands up and starts asking us about our sex life, saying we're both very attractive and we must be going home to bang after the dinner. He then says something along the lines of, "You're both so good looking, you would make beautiful babies." We laugh uncomfortably and say we're too young for that. Then he pulls out his wallet. He opens it and pulls out one of the multiple $100 bills that is in there and says, "I'll give you $100 to go home and make a baby right now." The boyfriend and I are flabbergasted and don't know how to respond. I end up joking about that I would have a baby, but the boyfriend doesn't want one for a few more years, a common joke theme in our relationship. And the man winked at me and said, "So, poke a hole in the condom. At this point, I'm just staring at him shocked, and I say, "Sir, I'm 19. He laughs and says, "And the Virgin Mary was 14. At that point, the boyfriend and I are looking at each other with shock, disdain, discomfort, etc. And the man's wife or something comes over to collect him. She ushers him out of the door as he makes some excuse about being drunk, as if that gives him a right to interrupt our anniversary dinner to ask us to party, or mess with him and his wife, and then grills us about our sex life. I was quite a naive teenager, and the first 12 or 13 years or so of my life were very sheltered, as I grew up in a small town community and attended schools that had fewer than 100 students. We moved when I was 14 to a larger urban area, at the time that I thought was a big city, but it's really not, and the new house was where I met the neighbor in question. I didn't realize until recently, when I really thought about that period of my life, that he was trying to groom me. I could have been a potential victim of his. It's 12 years on now, and I've only just realized what he was trying to do. When I was 14, we moved, packed up our lives and moved. Moved into a quiet cul-de-sac, and I attended the local school. My mom found a new job, and she worked a lot, so she was out of the house quite a bit. I had an older brother, but he was 20 and out partying or staying at other people's houses, so I saw him even less than I did my mom. I met the creepy neighbor the day after we moved in. He lived 3 houses down from us, and because it was a sleepy cul-de-sac, he had seen the comings and goings of cars and moving trucks. He came over, introduced himself, and presented my mom with a dish of lasagna and asked if there was anything he could do to help us. Normally, my mom is quite wary of new people, and she's been burned by users and abusers in the past, but she seemed comfortable around the neighbor, and he did very much put her at ease, even making her smile and laugh. He helped us with some of the larger items of furniture, and he even gave mom the contact information of the local plumbers and electricians, should we need them. He told us which were the best companies in town for internet, etc. In short, he was very friendly and helpful, going out of his way to make sure we were settled in. At first he kept to himself, and we really didn't see him in the first 3 months often at all. If I walked out and he was in the garden, then of course I'd stop and say hello. He asked a lot of questions, like about school and my friends and which teachers I liked and didn't like, about subjects I liked and if I had homework. Again, I didn't read too much into this, he was just being polite and neighborly. I guess he figured out mom's work pattern and that I was home alone a lot after school. Then he became bolder. One day I was walking home and it was after 4, as I'd had volleyball practice. He was out in his garden and it was a really hot day. He said hello and asked about school. Asked if I had enjoyed practice. He then invited me inside for a glass of lemonade. I told him I needed to get home and get dinner started so that my mom had something to eat when she finished in a few hours. He told me it was just a glass of lemonade and I had nothing to worry about. Long story short, most weeks after practice, I'd have something to drink with him. He was easy to talk to and friendly. Wasn't like any of the other grown-ups in my life. Looking back on it now, it seemed that it was easy to relate to him in a way. He wasn't trying too hard to be cool or like, "Hey kids, I'm one of you," you know? But he seemed to trust my intelligence in a way that no other adults could. He wasn't condescending, and he wasn't a rule enforcer like the teachers or other adults in my life. He also started dropping by the house a bit too. On the odd chance that my mom gotten off work early, or if it was her day off, then he wouldn't have, and if my brother was home, then again, not a peep out of the neighbor. But if it was the evening and I was home alone, then most days he'd come by. He was quite a good gardener, so he'd ask me what had been left for me to start dinner with. And he'd give me tips, or sometimes he'd go to his garden and pick some herbs, and I could use them for the meal. He also picked me flowers from his garden. Each time I thanked him, and he'd say something like, "That's what friends are for," or "You deserve flowers, you work hard in school." One time he even said to me, "Pretty flowers for a pretty girl." That one washed right over me. I thanked him and put the flowers in a vase. I didn't think about it at all. He somehow found out that it was my birthday, and so 2 days later, when I was once home alone again, he came by and gave me a silver bracelet. When I told him I couldn't accept it, he shushed me and did the whole nonsense. Think nothing of it. He then told me that it could be our little fun secret, and that I could only wear it when nobody else was around. It could be my thing. A fun little thing, and I could think of him. Again, despite the fact that red flags were all around me, I didn't think about it too much. He was the neighbor, and he was being a friend and keeping an eye on me because he knew I was home alone a lot. He very much wanted me to believe that I could trust him and view him as this protector who I could go to when/if I needed something. I got a few more gifts from him over time, and again, I was told it was our secret. that nobody else ever needed to know, and that they wouldn't understand the dynamics of our friendship after all. He told me. He wouldn't want to get both of us in trouble. And he was right, I didn't. Then one day he hugged me. I'd quickly gone over to his house to help with some odd job, and he hugged me. I'm also certain he sniffed my hair too, but I can't quite remember. I remember then feeling like it wasn't right. I was 16, nearly 17 by that stage, and we had been friends for 2 years now. He tried to convince me to stay longer, and I really remember having to spell it out to him that I had to get home. I really had to state explicitly several times I couldn't stay. I ran the very short distance home, and I must have looked out of sorts because my brother, who was home for once, asked me what was wrong. I didn't tell him about the neighbor. I made up some BS story about the neighborhood kids being rude and bullying me, so luckily the next few times I went out, he was with me to protect me. He wouldn't let me out of the house without him, and he sensed that I was really scared. The neighbor, seeing us always together and that my brother was actually home for a change, backed right off. We moved 2 months later. Mom got a better job offer, and we could afford a nicer house in a nicer area, so we moved. I shudder to think what would have happened if I'd stayed that day he had hugged me, and it makes me sick to think I ever ate or drank anything he gave me. It could have been spiked. I can't believe I was so easily fooled, and I was able to let somebody do that to me. So I live in Atlanta, and right now we're having a moment. About a month ago, a woman walking her dog in one of the parks, Atlanta's Central Park, was stabbed and mutilated along with her pit bull. The brutality shocked the city to its core and had everybody on edge. Add to that, another young woman was followed home from the gas station after leaving work as a bartender and was kidnapped and then murdered. This means we have a whole bunch of scared women in the city, too busy to hate. Anyway, I work very closely to the park where the woman and her dog were killed, and I had been extra careful since it happened. Last night I was working alone, and I had scheduled a new client for a 5 p.m. appointment, thinking I'd be done by 7:15 at the latest. However, she needed some extra work done, so it was after 8:30 by the time I walked her outside to her car. We stood talking in the parking lot for a couple of minutes before she got into her car. Here, I should add that my parking lot is small and fairly secluded because of a large hedgerow and a retaining wall. After I made sure she was safely in her car, I went back into the salon and locked the door behind me with the intention of cleaning and locking up. I was inside for less than 10 seconds before I turned around and saw a man pulling on the door. There had been no one in the parking lot that I could see, and there were no other cars than mine and my clients. This guy appeared from nowhere. As I said, I'm already on edge, so I stood there for a second, not sure what to do. And he stood there staring at me with his hands on the door handle. Finally, I walked up to the door. It's a glass door, so I could see him and he could see me, and I said, "What's up?" I could see that he was surprised that I didn't just unlock and open the door, and he started a couple of times before pointing at the hair product wall and saying, "Uh-oh, I wanted to buy some of that makeup over there." Here I noticed, 1, he's got a pretty good black eye, and 2, he's wearing a fairly large surgical mask outside alone, which made me think he's trying to hide his identity. I told him that's not makeup, that's hair products, because this is a hair salon and we are closed. Then I turned out all of the lights at the front of the salon and walked towards the back wall to hit those lights as well. Once I had all the lights out, I could see him, but he could not see me, so I watched him because I didn't want to go right out after that. He ended up pacing back and forth by the front door for a couple of minutes, and then he walked to the upper part of the parking lot, above the retaining wall, and stood half behind a tree and bush. He would stare at the salon door, then crouch down, then walk away all nonchalantly, then come back to his hiding spot and stare at the door again. After watching him do this about 3 times, I decided that the next time he walked away, I was going to make a run for my car. As soon as he turned his back and started walking towards the direction of the park, I ran out, locked the door, and sprinted the 20 feet to my car in a full-on panic, thankful for keyless entry. I have no idea what he was up to or if he was really a serial killer. Probably not, maybe just trying to rob me, but what I do know is that he definitely saw me in the parking lot talking to my client, and I did not see him. I also know that if I had not locked the door, I would have had a much different night. There is no question in my mind that he was going to harm me in some way. As a side note, lots of people have asked if maybe he was homeless, and I absolutely do not think so. He was very well dressed, and while he definitely scared the crap out of me, he did not give off the desperate vibe of a lot of the homeless or mentally ill addicted people that I have encountered in the past. Those people don't scare me really. Mostly I feel sad for them and try to help in some way. This guy had every alarm in my body screaming at full volume. Be warned, if you're coming to the A right now, maybe don't. This takes place in the summer of 2020. I had just started my new job being a package handler, and boy, does it get really hot in those warehouses. Even though I had ice water in one of those thermostat type bottles, I still had to fill it with more ice to keep cool and hydrated. Anyway, there was this other package handler that we'll call Rick. Rick's truck was pretty far from mine. His was an 01 while I was a 15, so he would have to walk all the way down just to see me. I would be filling my truck when he would just stand by the entrance to the truck, just smiling and staring at me. I tried to make small talk with him, but he would just nod while smiling and then walk away. This happened a lot. Sometimes I would help out other trucks as well, or even just the small stuff which we sorted into their own trucks. Anybody could help out with the small stuff, even Rick. I wasn't sure why he never spoke to me at first, just stared and smiled. Honestly, I was creeped out by it, but I didn't want to judge anyone either. I chalked it up to him just being shy or something. Soon I was moved to an 04, which meant I was just about right next to Rick. There was no 03 being filled at the time, and Rick worked on 01 and 02. I had a difficult time with 04, so I would mostly be stuck with my truck and unable to help out others. Oftentimes Rick would show up and watch me fill the truck. There was a time he had actually helped me out a little bit too, with the really heavy stuff that I couldn't carry by myself. Rick would come and bother me more and more. He made it even more difficult for me to work on my truck when I was already having a difficult time with it. Sometimes when I was in the back of the truck, I would come back to him standing in my way. It was kind of looming over me, and he wouldn't budge, almost like he was trying to trap me in. Then at some point he started poking me. He would poke my stomach, and I would ask if he would stop because I needed to focus on my truck. Well, one night he gave my stomach a poke. I admit that I'm ticklish, so I couldn't help but laugh. I tried to ignore him because I was already uncomfortable and I was really behind on my truck. Then he told me word for word, if there wasn't a camera, I'd poke a little higher. I froze because I knew what he was talking about, and he was talking about poking my chest. Now, I must admit, I have a very large chest, and they've caused me problems my whole life because of how big they are. I would have to say it's the first thing anyone would notice about me, unfortunately. I grew tired of Rick's harassment, and I had a hard time telling my supervisor, but I ended up telling her everything. She immediately took action. Rick was told to stay at home while this was under investigation and get a statement. Fortunately, luck was on my side. The trucks had cameras, and they could see that he trapped me in my truck a lot and also bothered me. Plus, the package handler in 06 constantly saw Rick approaching my truck and not leaving me alone, so he was fired. I almost broke down to my supervisor when she told me because the other bosses at my other jobs wouldn't care and allowed me to keep working with harassment. I don't know where Rick is now or what he is doing. I just hope he's not harassing anybody else, but I sure was glad to be free of him. This happened in June of last year, so I was 22 at the time. I was on my way home from therapy, which is a 20-minute bus ride, and it was about 6:30 to 7 p.m., but still light outside because it was summer. I think he got on about 2 stops after I did, and he immediately sits next to me. I don't think anything of it because the bus is filling up, and I just apologized because I realized my long cardigan was on part of his seat, and he says no problem and apologizes if he smells like cigarettes because he just finished one as the bus pulled up. I tell him it's fine. He carries on talking by saying how he knows it's a bad habit and he's trying to give up, and I say, yeah, it can be difficult, and mention how I quit a year before. We get talking about how I did it, and I don't really worry or anything because I'm getting off soon. My stop comes and we do the awkward thing where I try to communicate I need him to move. I'm a plus-size woman, so I'm always worried about squashing people if I just try to squeeze past them. He says it's no problem because he's getting off now too. Get off at the same time, and because I'm paranoid anyway, I head into the shop right by the bus stop. It's a habit I picked up after I was followed once before. He follows me into the shop and keeps trying to make conversation, trying to ask where I live. I'm being as vague as possible and just try to act like I'm super interested in the fruit. He grabs a basket and says he's going to carry my shopping. I tell him no, it's okay, I only need one thing, and he starts saying how he'll pay for whatever I want. Kind of just freezing him out and making my way towards the more crowded part of the shop just in case. He stops me. I don't really remember if he touches my arm or what, but he stops me somehow and says, "You don't remember me, do you?" Now, I don't know this man. He's a stranger who started talking to me on the bus, but upon him saying this, I try to rack my brains. Finally, he says, "We met before a little while ago. I told you I liked your lipstick and how beautiful I thought you were. You told me you had a boyfriend. How is he?" Immediately, I remember him. We did not meet a little while ago. We met in either early 2013 or late 2012. He walked up to me at 7 a.m. while I was walking to college. It was winter, so it was still dark at that time in the morning, and he told me he was attracted to me because of my lipstick. He wanted to know who I lived with and where I was going, and he asked if I wanted to go to his house for some wine. I did lie and tell him I had a boyfriend, but he just kept walking with me and trying to talk. I remember him following me all the way to my bus stop saying, "Why does you having a boyfriend stop you from making friends?" And I had to be like, it doesn't stop me from making friends, but I don't think my boyfriend would like it if I went over to another man's house to drink wine. And he kept persisting, so in the end I just said, I don't want to. Now back in the store 5 years later after that first encounter, he's standing in front of me saying again how much he likes my lipstick. He remembered me because of it, and again asking if I want to come home with him to drink some wine. At this point I've just had enough and I say, I do remember you now, and we didn't meet a while ago. It was a long time ago. Like 5 years ago. You remembered my face from 5 years ago. I was trying to be polite before, but you should know that before when you were trying to get to me to go home with you, I was barely 17, and I may have even been 16. That's just weird, bro. He's getting nervous at this point, I suppose because I'm not keeping my voice down and we are still in a shop. I see in the corner of my eye the door security looking over, so I start edging towards them. He just asks if I still have a boyfriend, says again how he finds me beautiful, and he just wants to get to know me. As you might have guessed, I'm kind of losing my patience at this point. As soon as I realized I'd had near enough the same conversation with him 5 years ago, and he remembered me from then and still decided to try again, I just got mad. I told him that whether or not I had a boyfriend wasn't the problem. The problem was he's an older, I'd guess was mid-late 30s, stranger who approached a teenage girl walking on her own at 7 a.m. Nobody was around and the sun was barely even up in the sky. He walked with her more than 5 minutes trying to convince her to go home with him. And then he's seen her 5 years later and tried the same thing. I ended my speech with just saying, it's not going to happen, you are too old for me and I'm not interested one bit. Before I started walking towards the cereal aisle. He left thankfully. I saw him leave the shop, but I was still paranoid he'd hang around outside and wait for me. I called my big little brother, 3 years younger than me but a whole foot taller, and told him what had happened. As soon as I said a guy had followed me into a shop, I heard him start putting his shoes on and he told me to stay where I was. By the time he made it to the shop, I was by the exit talking to the security and just relaying what happened in case the guy came back. My brother saw the security and immediately said, "Is that the weirdo?" And I have to swear to him, No, this is the security. He works here, he's fine. So this was about 3 years ago and it still creeps me out. I was 18, female at the time. I'm now 21. I was walking home from work at the local pizza joint and took my usual route home. It was about 9:45 to 10:15 p.m. and it was very dark. As I'm getting about 100 yards away from the street I live on, a white van turns onto that street. Something didn't sit right with me, so I yanked out my earbuds and paused my music. I then turned down my street, and as I'm getting closer to my house, I start getting a weird gut feeling. I look up from my phone, and as I was about to text my roommate, who was out of town at the time, that I was almost home, about 15 yards or so. As I look up, I notice the white van sitting in front of my house, and the man inside is just staring at me, the yellow car light shining on his face. He had brown hair, glasses, and facial hair. His van lights were off, but his car was running. I stopped and put my back to a tree in my neighbor's yard and just stood there, maintaining eye contact with this man. After what seemed like an eternity, probably like 5 minutes minimum, he starts driving towards the stop sign at the end of the road. I didn't put my back to him. I kept my back to the tree and maintained visual on the side the entire time until it stopped at the stop sign. He just sat there for probably 2 to 3 minutes, all while I was not looking away and while my back was still on the tree. Finally, he turned right, the direction in which I had come from, and after about 20 seconds of making sure he or anybody else wasn't coming, I bolted to my house. I quickly get inside and lock the door. I go to the window and very quietly look through the blinds. I didn't turn on any lights because I'm not stupid. After a few seconds of looking, he drove back up and down the street and left again. Afterwards, I texted my roommate what happened and then went to each and every one of the windows in my house to make sure they were locked along with the back door and garage door. I made sure to keep all the lights off for the remainder of the night. I didn't sleep a lick that night. I was so paranoid at every sound or movement. Let's just say I never walked home after that. Full disclosure, this happened 10 years ago, but I still can't believe how lucky I was to get away. I was 16 female and running late for school as usual. Walking down the road, I noticed a dark green car with tinted windows slowly following behind me. This was a residential community, and it was not unusual for people to drive slowly. It was around 9 a.m. on a weekday, so I naively figured there was no danger, as I hurried toward the bus stop. Arriving at the stop, it had started to rain, so I decided to stand in the small glass bus shelter to wait for the bus. The creepy green car stopped in front of the bus stop. The driver got out and approached me in the bus shelter. Now, this bus shelter was so small there was only room for about 2 people. He stood in the entrance and grabbed each side of the shelter, trapping me inside. He was very large and extremely physically intimidating. Something about his dead eyes sent chills through my entire body. He asked if I was familiar with the area, and I responded, yes, I was. He asked if I was going to school, and I said yeah. Then asked if he could drive me to school so I could show him the way. Called it intuition, but something in my head was screaming not to get in the car with him. I politely declined his offer and asked if he needed help with directions or something. Suddenly he lunged at me, grabbing my arm, and he pulled me out of the bus shelter towards his car. I started screaming as he kept insisting it would be faster to drive. By the grace of God, the bus pulled up at this exact moment, and all my instincts told me to fight. I clawed at his face, kicked him, bit him, and contorted my body until he loosened his grip on my arm. Once free, I leapt on the bus as though my life depended on it. The bus driver asked if I was okay, but I couldn't reply. I ran to the back to find a seat and cried quietly in the corner as the bus carried me to school. All day, I sat in class and said nothing about what happened to me. When I got home from school, I told my parents what happened. They were horrified, especially after I showed them the bruise from the man's hand on my arm. They called the police, and the officer arrived late that evening and took my statement. He said there had been several similar incidents in the area, and he asked if I could come to the station and look at some pictures to identify the culprit. The following week, my mom and I head into the police station. The officer sets up with the computer and we start to scroll through the mugshots. There were so many. Not only was it discouraging to realize how many known sex offenders there are close by, but after a while all the faces blurred together. Losing hope of identifying the guy, we were about to give up when I recognized his dead eyes in one of the pictures. The officers asked if I was sure. I confirmed it was him, but he had grown a beard since the photo was taken. They thanked me and said that they would call if needed. 2 weeks later, the news announced the police had apprehended the suspected man of kidnapping and assaulting young girls in the area. The news story included his mugshot, and it was the same man I had identified 100%. He was caught with one of his underage victims in the car. It took years for the gravity of this incident to truly hit me. Had the bus arrived later, had I not been able to twist myself out of his grasp, had he grabbed me while I was walking and didn't see him, so many ways this could have turned out differently. I was so fortunate when others were not. Call me paranoid all you want, but I can't help but think somebody comes into my house while I and my roommates are away, or even worse, home. I'm going to change a few things because I'm genuinely scared, but the basis of the story is the same. My housemates and I are all 21 to 22 female, and we recently moved into a house near our college campus. We do not have keys and instead have a code that we use on our doors. Note, we have 3 pretty calm pets. It started with weird individual experiences. Random small things going missing either from public spaces or other things that were easy to look over. Also to mention, we're all very close and honest with one another. The things missing couldn't even be stolen, and the house is not big. There are only so many places the items could have been, you know? Then there have been occurrences where we leave with all the blinds open and come back to find they're all closed. Blankets that were left out but are randomly folded. It's been getting spookier recently. One of my roommates was home alone and heard a thud. She looked around. All the pets were in the living room with her. She then heard footsteps and called out to us with no answer. So she grabbed the pets and loaded them into her car because she was hysterical and convinced somebody else was home with her. To top it off, the other day, I was trying on some clothes and kept getting a hint of something foul. After much investigation, I realized it's the very shorts I'm wearing. Confused AF, I rummaged through my drawer, and out of my 3 rows of shorts, the row in the middle smells and is stained with urine. I was so disgusted. When I tell you, we have pondered every possible explanation from our pets to even ourselves. The smell wasn't that of a cat or dog. There were no rat droppings. I immediately registered it as human pee. After doing all my laundry, I noticed 2 identical pairs of my underwear missing. Nowhere to be found at all, and in a place no pet could get into or take to hide. We're not crazy, right? If somebody could, please give us any logical explanations, because maybe, just maybe, yours is the one that our brains will believe enough to help me sleep at night. If not, what do we do? Huge update. Firstly, thank you to everybody who has been offering suggestions and perspective. We really appreciate it, and I knew I could count on Reddit for answers. We've been trying to not talk about the situation much because it seems like when we do, we ask for something bad to happen, so we refer to it as Joe or just text it if it's urgent. We ordered cameras on Amazon and we'll be setting them up later. One outside the front door and the other outside the back door. We'll work on getting others from inside, but for immediate action, the doors are the most important. Something I forgot to mention. Our house is a duplex style home, so we have 2 floors. The first floor where my bedroom has 2 points of entry, not including the windows, but we keep the windows locked and there are screens. The second floor has 2 bedrooms and a laundry room, and the attic door is in between all 3. We are also the first tenants in this house. Somebody did do a sweep of the attic today. An interesting thing to note, there was a blue paint dried and crusted on the entryway of the attic, the side of the door that you don't see from the floor, and the floor / the bottoms of a few bins we have up there. We couldn't find the source of the paint, and we do not own paint of any kind. As of right now, the missing item count is at 5, with 2 of its newest additions today. When I got back from class, 2 earrings from 2 different pairs, 1 from each, were in a small container on my dresser. I won't count on it just yet though, since I give myself 24 to 48 hours in case I misplace something. Starting tomorrow, I will be locking my bedroom door when I'm not here. Not sure if this is relevant, but something to think about too. We met a neighbor who lives a few houses down maybe a month ago. She, 23 female, was very nice but grew fond of us very quickly and started to become so comfortable that it made us uncomfortable. She knocks on our door almost every other night to hang out, which has even resulted in us being completely silent and turning off the lights so she thinks we're away. She has my friends on social media, but I never followed her back because the last time she came over, she was hinting that she had a crush on me and kept trying to touch my hands and thigh and was trying to stay overnight. I never said anything about it, just ignored that it was happening. She has also mentioned multiple times before how she notices when we leave or come back. She's learned the sound of our cars and horns and knows which cars come back based solely on the lights at night. She definitely remembers and knows our routines and has even said, I notice I am the one who has gone the most. Kinda weird, but to be honest, she seems too nice to ever do anything dangerous. Maybe she's just lonely. So, goals for the week. Set up cameras tonight, buy a bedroom camera, change door codes, writing incidents with dates in a journal, give a written report to the police department, booby trap the house. If you're listening to this, we love you and we'll keep you updated. At 6 a.m., I get a call from work. It's a hospital, so they screen us by phone before coming in. Whatever. This was March 15th. The alarm is for 6:30 a.m. and I can't sleep. Browsing my phone in an otherwise dark room, pitch dark outside. Then I hear 4 very distinct taps on the window frame above my head and my heart stops. I live in a nice neighborhood, first floor in a house. The window is to my backyard, where a very squeaky gate and fence are blocking it. Another set of tapping a few seconds later, and a calm and steady set of 3. I freeze, and another 3 set of turns on my bedside lamp. A set of 2 taps follows. I cannot see out the window at all. The blinds were closed, and there was a very small gap between them, but honestly I was in shock. Another set of taps a few seconds later. 2 or 3, I can't remember. One more time, maybe a set of 4. I cannot move. Then the gate quietly scraped and the tapping stops. I'm a very light sleeper, and the gate is loud. I would have heard somebody get it. I inspected and found nothing outside of the norm. I am doubting it's a burglar. Why would they tap when they could see the light on my phone and after I turned the light on? There are no trees out the window, and the taps were nothing like a bird or a bug. On the 16th, my priority was to make sure nobody was studying my routine or planning to rob me or murder me. So I set up a somewhat ridiculous homemade noise trap that would wake the neighborhood, and also set up a phone in the closet window with a sleep recorder to document and hopefully spook any mischief. What I found next morning I cannot explain. I went to sleep and lights out at exactly 11:30 p.m. Uneventful night. I wake up, shower, and check the sleep recorder, and the first clip recorded at 11:41 p.m. made my heart sink. Nobody else is awake or moving in the house. My neighbors are old, definitely were asleep, and they were always absolutely quiet. The first part of that clip is clearly something last falling and crashing, so I sheepishly go outside to inspect the aftermath of the broken bottles. To my surprise, nothing has changed. The bottles are exactly where I left them, and the entire exterior and interior of the house are completely unremarkable. Sure, somebody could have set the bottles back up and jumped the fence, but the sleep recorder did not pick anything else up that was unusual the rest of the night. I just set up a night vision camera. Here's to hoping this mystery is definitely solved tonight. We'll update tomorrow morning. Update. On a remarkable night. So the camera works great, but it does have a big blue light, so it is not stealthy. If somebody were being careful, they could definitely see through the fence before entering. If all it is a deterrent, it is still very much worth it to me. The camera is going to stay up. I'll have to put a new post up if there are any updates. Stay safe out there, fam. For context, I'm British and live in England, and this story took place when I was 15. I'm now 18, but it has bugged me ever since it happened. This is a very short one, but this has lingered in the back of my mind ever since it happened. I was playing video games on a Wednesday night, and there was a knock on the door at 11 p.m., which was out of the ordinary and, in itself, a bit odd. My mom was the one who answered it, but since it was so late, I came out to see who it was myself as well. We have a square-shaped spiral staircase with platforms as you go up each step, and there's a balcony at the top, which I could look over. It was also dark, so it would be hard to see me, especially from outside of the front door. When my mom opened the door, there were two men whom she described as sounding German, wearing black suits. They were pasty white, tall, clean-shaven, and quite bulky. They didn't say anything like why they were there, what they wanted, or who they were, just asking if I was home. What got me was that they didn't just go by my first name, but also my last name. My mom thankfully said no and told them they had the wrong house. My mom, after she had closed the door, told me they were still outside looking at our windows. She told me to stay out of sight since she thought they were eyeing the house to see if I was home or not. After about 20 to 30 minutes, they finally left the pavement. But my mom was convinced they'd be sitting in their car still watching, so I hid a bit longer. It was really intimidating, especially considering I was 15 and had never done anything malicious. This was 3 years ago, and I've heard nothing since. I've always wondered who they were and what they wanted, or if it was even a malicious encounter at all. Nonetheless, it truly freaked me out. To clarify, I guess I'm not certain they were German, but that's what my mom said their accent reminded her of. They were pretty quiet, so I barely heard them myself and only got a glance of them, in the dark outside the door. Here are some pretty good theories. 1. A harmless prank by a friend calling some religious group to my house, Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons. 2. I somehow ended up on a cult's list. 3. Insert random scenario here. The list is endless. This happened during the summer of 2002 while I was on a family trip in Las Vegas. My 11 at the time of the story female family and I went out on a family vacation to Las Vegas. There were a bunch of us since we had family visiting from out of the country. After hitting the swimming pool, my family wanted to go to another hotel to go shopping. My grandma, note, she had just immigrated from the Philippines a few years before and knew very limited English, and I decided to go back up to her hotel room because she was tired and I wanted to change before meeting back up with the rest of our family later on for lunch. We got into the elevator, and as it was closing, an older gentleman, maybe in his early to mid-50s, asked to hold the door. I remember my mom telling me not to let strangers know where our room was, so before I got in, I pressed 2 more floors, and thankfully I did. He got in and started making small talk. He looked at my shirt. I was wearing a Beach Babe Contest tank top from Limited 2, and said, "Where's the Beach Babe Contest? I'd like to be the judge and make sure you win." My grandma and I smiled at each other and laughed. Then he asked what room we were staying in. I told him that we were visiting a family member's room. He then asked if we were staying at the hotel and if he could escort us back to our room. I told him no. His face at some point turned cold, whereas before he appeared friendly. He began to insist that he walk us back to our room. At that point, I began panicking and just fell silent. My grandma stared at me, and after what felt like an eternity, his smile came back and then he said, "Come on, I'm just being nice, right, Grandma?" I remember my stomach sinking, until finally the elevator door opened and a couple walked in. I don't know what in me told me to trust them, but I blurted out, "I don't know this man, but he is forcing me to let him walk me to my hotel room and I'm scared." The man then laughed and told them that I was his niece. I kept my composure as best as I could, but I just remember starting to cry, and I couldn't stop crying. My grandma was confused because she didn't really know what was going on. The couple told us to get off the elevator so that I could call my parents, and they walked me and my grandma down to the hotel lobby to the reception desk. I still get chills thinking about what may have happened that day. So my let's not meet encounter happened 7 years ago. I haven't really spoken about it since it happened, as I kind of just wanted to move on, and I was really unnerved by the whole experience. I was 25. I am female, and I was working a job as an admin assistant, office worker to tide me over and pay my bills until I eventually figured out what the career of my dream was. I was tired of the job. I'd been there about a year when this happened, and believe me, when the creepy shit went down, I was certainly incensed to get myself on a decent career path and the heck out of that place. So you understand my old workplace building, which will give you a clear picture of how this began. I worked in a somewhat old building with a few floors, and on each floor were numerous office spaces that were rented out by different companies. It was a pretty open plan building, some parts more dilapidated than others, and it was in serious need of refurbishment to bring it A, up to health and safety standards, and B, cosmetic standards for the general public. How the offices on my floor were set out meant that our small office, which only consisted of 4 to 5 workers on different days, was situated at the front of the building with access through the front and back of the building, but nobody really used the back. Our staff quarters, as we called them, the lunchroom, were situated at the back of the building, and being an older style building meant there was a long hall and lots of space between the office and the staff quarters. Staff quarters were used only for lunch breaks, and as we were such a small office, we all rotated our lunch breaks so that only one person was off for lunch in the lunchroom at a time. Nobody else really used the lunchroom, as they preferred to go out and get lunch from the nearby shops, but as I had a shorter lunch break, it was always me, alone in the lunchroom at the back of this old creepy-ass building by the rear entry point. Other parts of the building were now under refurbishment, so there was a lot of upheaval in certain spaces and areas, but we managed to retain ours as normal for a while, before building work was scheduled to begin on our floor. Bear in mind that the lunchroom was so far back from the main offices that nothing could be heard or seen that way. There were only 2 companies on the ground floor where I was situated. The other one was on the other side of the building and used the front entrance, but we rarely saw them and certainly didn't keep track of their staff members or clients, and there was no need for us to see who was going in and out. Anyways, I digress. I was sitting in the lunchroom one day eating, heater going as it was freezing, minding my own business, when out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow quickly sweep past the door from the light underneath it. It wasn't unusual for new clients to be wandering around looking for a specific office they required. As we were on the ground floor, there was often a slew of stupid people wandering the corridors aimlessly looking for the office they required. We did have a code entry system on the front door and a telephone system, so you could press the office you needed to get into and it would call through, and they would let you in so people couldn't just walk in without being let in, if you get me. We also had a code for workers to use to get through the front door. As I said, the back door wasn't much used apart from the odd worker who had a set of keys for it, and it was completely unmonitored. I wasn't too startled even when the lunchroom door opened this particular day, and a smart-looking man put his head round, suited and booted and smelling like expensive cologne. I honestly was more embarrassed to see somebody as attractive peering in, as I was sat there with mayo splatter on my shirt and a mouthful of bread, looking in absolute state. But hey, I didn't usually see anyone back there, and I am a messy eater, I admit. "Can I help you?" I asked him, trying to clean myself up. He laughed and said I looked like the one who needed help, and I immediately laughed back, aware that he was still at the door and not imposing on me in any way. Yet, when I laughed along with him, he seemed to take that as an invitation to come right in and sit opposite me at the table. And to my surprise, he took some food out of his expensive-looking leather bag and started brazenly eating a sandwich. "Hey, I'm the HR manager for such and such company upstairs, and every time I go out to get my lunch, I always wonder who is sitting in here alone, so I thought I'd just have a look," he said, still eating and seemingly very calm and chilled. The weird thing about him was that he seemed so normal. Nothing about this guy made me worried. In fact, it was nice to have some company on my lunch break, as most of the time I just sat scrolling through creepy news articles on my phone. We carried on chatting, mostly about mundane stuff. I asked him about his job and the company upstairs, and he asked me about mine. I asked him about where he usually took his lunch breaks, Just normal small talk, but it felt more comfortable than that. This guy was super charming. He made me feel at ease. That part is the most chilling to me. I was totally at ease and unguarded. It became a pretty regular thing for him to join me in the lunchroom, and honestly, I was beginning to get a bit of a crush on this guy. He had a good job, was attractive, and was very charming and normal. I began looking forward to seeing him. Stupid, I know. A little attention from an attractive guy, but hey, I was single and not bad looking. So I figured, why couldn't I have a harmless little crush? He had told me his name was Alan, and honestly, I didn't intend to take it anywhere with him. I was totally happy single at the time, and I was getting some minor flirtations from him, but nothing that confirmed he had a crush on me too, or wanted to take it any further. He moaned about the building work taking place and how the whole upstairs offices were a mess. Their break rooms, etc., had all been gutted, and he was glad to have somewhere to eat his lunch that nobody else knew about from his office. Again, not your average creeper, I know. At this point, I didn't even think the guy was a creeper. Until one day, things took a turn. Alan stormed into the lunchroom one Thursday, and I swear, in his eyes, I saw the look of a caged animal. You know that crazy look. You know that restless and jittery and hyper look. It kind of says somebody isn't thinking straight at all. I immediately had my guard up a bit because I had never seen him like this before. It freaked me out the way he stormed into the room, slammed his bag down on the table, and started ranting about how his boss was a jerk and that he wished he could gut him like a fish. All while pacing around, running his hand through his hair, beads of sweat forming on his brow, and pure rage in his eyes. I'd always thought his eyes were so pretty before. They were a steely blue, but right now they looked darker and more imposing than ever. I tried really hard to pacify him and calm him down. I was repeatedly saying it would be alright and to calm down and let's just eat. And whatever had happened, I'm sure could be sorted out. He slumped down in a chair and I went over to him, kind of standing beside him but obviously over him, and I put my hand on his shoulder to console him. With that, he flew up and pushed me back against the wall. I was stunned and I couldn't speak. His body was pressed against me, and almost through his rage, he was in a trance-like state. After he pushed me back against the wall, he just stood there, his hands holding my wrist down by my side. Almost like he was taking some weird comfort from the fact that he had me up against the wall. He buried his face into my neck and I was frozen to the spot, like, what the heck is going on here? I always said I would never be one of those girls in an emergency or dangerous situations to freeze. But honestly, I had never been in this type of situation, and I could tell he was really volatile in this precise moment. I really didn't know what he was going to do, so I didn't want to risk pissing him off more and then have him attack me or something. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, his face buried in my neck, still holding my wrist quite forcefully, when all of a sudden, he licked my neck and said, "You smell nice." Yes, he actually licked my neck. Seemingly calmer, that's when I decided, nope, I am not standing here with this person who was clearly unstable, holding me up against a wall in anger, and then suddenly being all soft-spoken again and licking my neck in this weird predatory way. That's what it felt like to me right in that second. I felt so stupid for starting to eat with this guy and not even question why he was coming to our lunchroom. I told him to get off me. I was leaving. At that point, I was prepared to take a beating. It shouldn't have been like that, but I honestly didn't know what his deal was. Was he crazy? Was he just emotional or upset? Was he trying to seduce me? Was he going to hurt me? I don't know. I realized I didn't even know this guy. We spent half an hour to an hour in each other's company, passing the lunch hour, but I didn't really know anything about him as a person. It had been a couple of weeks of lunches together, and I realized how short an amount of time that was to really have any idea about this person. He let go of my wrists, and then in the most sinister tone I'd ever heard, he said, "You always seem like you wanted it from me, you damn whore." Before I could respond, he grabbed his bag and stormed out of the lunchroom, and tears just sprung to my eyes. I cracked the door open to make sure he'd left, and I just sprinted back to the front of the building where my office was and told the guys in there everything that had just happened. They were absolutely fuming. They knew this guy had been hanging around me in the lunchroom, but as I'd always been comfortable with it and thought Alan was okay, nobody ever thought anything of it. They actually thought it was hilarious every day when I came back from lunch all tongue-tied after my encounter with attractive Alan, as they now referred to him. They insisted we march upstairs and put in a complaint as a company, and I knew that even if I didn't agree, they would march up themselves to do it. Eventually, I agreed, after feeling shaky and vulnerable, but I knew I didn't want to have to face Alan after the incident in the lunchroom. I went up regardless, flanked by 2 guys I worked with, one of whom was my immediate boss. As we began explaining the situation, it was evident that something was wrong. The woman and the man from the upstairs company looked really confused when I explained about their HR manager, Alan, and what he had done. They explained that their HR manager was a female called Jules, and that I must have been mistaken because there was no Alan that worked at the company. We asked every single company in the building, and not one company had an Alan working for them and never had. We eventually came to the conclusion that Alan had been coming in every day for lunch, but with absolutely no idea why or what for. We also didn't know if he had the building code or a set of keys for the back, and we didn't know where he had initially come from. Unnoticed, wandering freely around the building. The locks were changed, the code was changed, and CCTV was installed, as it never had been before. Plus, security checks were put in place at the building after this incident, with everybody entering the building being monitored. I never ever saw Alan again, and I still to this day don't know why he was coming in the building every day, having lunch with me, pretending to be an office worker, and I don't know what happened that day when he flipped. So yeah, this isn't the usual creeper on Let's Not Meet, but Alan, let's never meet again. I'm back with another story from my childhood. I tried to add more details that I can remember since the last one got requests to be more specific. I was about 14 or 15 years old, walking back from one of my friend's house at around 10 p.m. on a school night. Trisha's father was a police dispatcher, and the small, medium town I grew up in didn't have much of a force to speak of. I could run to the station in 2 minutes flat, and the park I frequented was next to it. It was also the same building as the Justice Department. Between Trisha's house and my own was less than a mile. I was halfway there when I could see a car, a Ford of a dark color, slowly roll through an intersection in front of me. I knew it was a Ford because it looked like a normal unmarked police car. It stopped for a good 30 seconds in the middle of said intersection as I walked towards it. When I got to it, I sort of stopped. Not as much scared as I was plain confused. I walked around the back of it. The lights inside were turned off as well, and the dark shape in front of the seat sat very still. I kept my ears perked, listening to the sound of the car's tires inching across the gravel. I didn't want to turn, but I could hear the low purr of the engine behind me, following me ever so slowly. Now I was worried. But Dad didn't teach me to panic, especially for how close I was to the police station. I took a deep breath and broke into a full-on sprint across the road, passing through people's lawns and yards, and through an open lot until I could see the 2-lane road that cut our town in half. Across that road was the station. I didn't even want to look behind me again and see if the man was there, because I heard his car. No lights flooded the ground or the space around me. He still had them turned off. I kept running into the street. It was so late and there were no cars on the road. I pushed open the gate separating the park and the outside, flying through it. Breathing hurt. It was winter in the northeast, and the cold was biting. When I reached the glass door of the city hall/police station, my heart fluttered. I was safe. It would be okay. I had to ring the bell to get the police to open the double-locked doors. As I did that, I heard a car pull in behind me into the parking lot. It was that same car, and who should step out of it but Trisha's dad, in his police dispatcher's uniform. Honey, why'd you run away from me? Trying to get your attention. You left your cell phone out. He held it out, walking towards me, proving his good intentions. His smile was wide and it was supposed to be reassuring, but it chilled me. Nobody came to the door. I was alone with him still. When he got to me, I grabbed the cell phone and stuffed it into my back pocket. I remember the next thing that happened like it was yesterday. He had coffee on his breath and he smelled like cigarettes. Suddenly, he grabbed my arm and pinned me to the door behind him. Didn't your, insert racial slur here, daddy tell you to say thank you, pretty girl? I was shocked. Not once have he ever spoken to me like that. They were from Kansas, but he'd never given any indication that he thought like this. "Didn't you hear me, girl?" He was inches from my face, his grin now a creepy, sadistic sneer. He used his thumb that pinned my arm to touch the side of my breast. The way he said "girl" still sends a cold shiver down my spine. I've been assaulted before, but Trisha's dad's way of saying "girl" still haunts me today. I'll hear it in my mind and want to shrink into nothingness, scream at it until it goes away and cry. And just as suddenly, he let go and laughed. I didn't know until a police officer knocked on the glass door behind me. He was staring at Trisha's dad. "Problem, miss?" "No problem, officer. She just forgot her cell phone." Trisha's dad answered for me, his normal smile back on his face. He stepped away from me and let go, but I could still feel his hands on my arm. I don't remember what I did. Nod? Whimper? But I blinked on whatever happened until I got home and cried. Never even told my twin sister, Lexi, what went down. Ever since then, he looked at me in the creepiest way. He would do that sneer at me as soon as I walked into the door to their house. I'll never forget how awful that night made me feel. I didn't walk home alone again. Without a knife, I took from my dad's possessions at least. He's always been a creep and has caused a lot of issues with Trisha's mom and him. They're divorced now since this happened almost 10 years ago. Not only was this the beginning of my problems with him, but it was for Trisha too. She and I still keep in very close contact, and she updates me on her situations with them. Apparently, he attempted to molest her several times with physical repercussions. She's a strong-willed, physically capable woman and handled herself well. She got the heck out of Dodge as soon as she turned 18. Thankfully, she's an adult now, far away from him, and hasn't seen him in several years. I hope she never does. Hello. First off, I'm very new to posting here, so please let me know if I need to correct anything. This just happened yesterday evening in a small mountain town about 40 minutes outside of the major city that my boyfriend and I live in. We had decided to reserve a jacuzzi at a hot springs resort, just to take some time to relax and enjoy getting out of the city for a few hours. We left the apartment around 6:30, to allow for traffic and make sure we made it to the resort by 8. We had a nice drive up, making conversation and flicking through songs. We arrived about half an hour ahead of schedule, so we decided to sit in the car and wait to check in. When we arrived, I was immediately met with a sense of unease. I didn't tell my boyfriend, but made a mental note of the feeling. I've learned not to brush those feelings off, so I made sure I was a bit more alert during our little trip. We checked in and got all set up in our jacuzzi. The way it was set up was very private, so there was fencing all around us and a door with a lock on it to get into the area. When I first walked in, I was overcome with the feeling that I had to get that door locked as soon as I could. I'm usually a safe person and would have done this anyway, but the feeling of the locked door being a necessity at that moment was rather uncanny. As the night progresses, the sky begins to darken, and my boyfriend and I are remarking on how beautiful the mountains and sky are at this time of the evening. We are making jokes about some crazy mountain man running out of the hills towards us, and I start cracking up. I'm mid-laugh when we hear someone jiggle the door to our jacuzzi area. I stop laughing, and I am immediately struck with a fight-or-flight sense of fear. Now, I've been startled before, but this was just different. I felt legitimately threatened by the energy that whoever was outside of that door was giving off. As the jiggling continued, my boyfriend called out, "Yo, you need something?" The person on the other side began to yank forcefully on the door now, and my boyfriend yelled out, "Hey." I've heard my boyfriend's voice when he gets upset or angry at someone, but this was different. This was the "you really don't want to mess with me" protective type of voice. The jiggling continued for a moment longer and then ceased completely. During this time, I had been about 15 feet away from my clothes, which contained my knife, and was 100% ready to dive for them if the person had broken through the locked door. Since we were only a few minutes away from our time being up anyway, we decided to get dressed as quickly as possible and just book it back to the car. The whole time we were getting ready, up until we drove out of the lot, I could feel somebody watching us. About 100 yards or so away from the resort, there was a park of mobile homes. From our tub, you could easily see these mobile homes if you stood up on the edge of the jacuzzi. That means that whoever was home and looking out their window could see you too. During the whole time we were there, I was the only one who stood up completely, so I'm the only one that anyone in the mobile homes would have seen, making it seem like I was all alone there potentially. Later in the evening, my boyfriend and I were rehashing exactly what had happened and trying to figure out who the heck had tried to get into our jacuzzi. We figured if it had been resort staff, they would have made their presence known and asked to come inside. If it had been another customer and they tried the wrong door, we assumed they would have said something like, "Oh, sorry, wrong door." My boyfriend looked at me and said, "You know, you were the only one who stood up in the hot tub. And with the way it's positioned, somebody in that trailer could have easily been staring right at you." This honestly made my blood run cold for a moment because I knew he was right and I knew in my gut that's probably what happened. I'm a pretty small girl, about 5'5", and I look barely 18, even though I'm actually almost 23 and I weigh about 100 pounds. Overpowering me would be like taking candy from a baby. This realization, coupled with the fact that we both felt so disturbed and uneasy about the whole thing, made me realize whoever was trying to get in there did not have any good intentions. I've thought about sharing this story on Reddit before. The time and place never seemed right until I found this subreddit. I rarely ever think of this. I think I mostly blocked it out. I am female, and when I was 25, I was in a transition period of my life. I was divorcing my husband and moving back to my home state to figure stuff out. My aunt had a small 1,500 square foot, 1950s house in a quiet neighborhood. A doors that stick, squeaky wood floors type of place. She had moved out but couldn't commit to the sale. She was happy to let me live there for a bit. I lived in the house for about 5 months. This house was a single-story home, but it was on a hill, so if you went around the back of the house outside, you could walk through a door in a small basement of sorts that you could stand in. If you were in this small basement and continued to walk toward the front of the house, you would quickly be crouching and then crawling. It was a small concrete storage area, and it was under what was my bedroom. One thing I remember about this place was that it was creaky and not well insulated. The floors were creaky, and when you were down in the basement area, you could sort of see light coming through the cracks in the bedroom floorboards. I maybe went down there once, got creeped out, and left. It was around the back of the house, like I said, and I had no reason to even be back there. Being 25 and recently leaving my jerk husband, I will admit I had a few male suitors visit me in that house, in that creaky, uninsulated bedroom. So I get my dream job, and I am moving out of the house. I'm also moving out of the state. My aunt has one request of me, to turn the water off at the street before I leave. So right before I leave the house, I turn the water off at the street. I come back inside and turn on the tub faucet. No water. I have done my job. However, this is where fate steps in. I left the faucet turned on. Didn't think to turn it back off. I drive away to my new life. A few days later, my aunt calls. She's upset because the water company has called her to say there is an unusually high amount of water running at her home. I promised her that I turned the water off and told her about checking the tub, so I'm out of state. She's out of state. My mom gets recruited to go over and figure out what's going on. Well, come to find out, the neighbor's husband from next door had been kicked out. He was living in the little room under my bedroom. He had strung an electric cord over the fence from his house. He had clothes and a toothbrush. Guess he was bathing in our yard. And when I turned off the water, he went right back out to the street and turned it back on. He had been living right under my bedroom floorboards. I am tense just writing and remembering this. I never ever want to meet this guy. The thought of him right under my feet, listening to me in my bedroom, still gives me chills. March 14th, 2008. I was 7 years old, a junior in high school. I lived in a square-mile suburban town in Nassau County, which is one of the richest counties in America. Life there was very quiet. Not much goes on. I had been struggling with depression and couldn't focus on my schoolwork. I had a paper and a whole bunch of homework I hadn't done the night before, so I woke up at 7 a.m. and made my way downstairs to my mom's room to ask if I could sleep in, catch up on some schoolwork, and go to school late, and she said okay. I woke up around 10 a.m., later than I had anticipated. I walked downstairs, poured myself a bowl of cereal, and said good morning to my poodle. That's when I heard knocking on the door. At first it was regular, calm knocking. I didn't think much of it, but didn't want to answer the door in my pajamas. I picked up the house phone and dialed my mom's phone number. She was at work, as a church secretary. Hey, Mom, are you expecting anybody at the house? Because somebody is knocking on the door. No. Could it be the cable guy? No? Okay, I won't answer it. After I hung up the phone, the knocking continued. It increased and started becoming more rapid and frantic. I peeked through the curtain and saw a bluish pickup truck outside my property, and a man standing at the door. He had a red hat on, a denim jacket, jeans and sneakers. No logos or uniform. I didn't get a good read on his face either. He kept knocking. At this point it was riling up my dog and he was barking on the top of the knocking. I swear, the knocking seemed to go on forever. I checked the locks on the doors to make sure they were secure. Then suddenly it stopped. Quiet. And I hear a creak, the sound of the side gate to my house. My pulse raced. Maybe it's the meter reader. I stood in a panic in the living room. The next thing I heard was shuffling coming from the bathroom. Could it be my cat playing with the shower curtain? I had to check. I walked down the hall and peered around the corner to see inside my bathroom. I'll never forget what I saw. The window in the shower was wide open. In the middle of my bright and sterile bathroom was a dark mess pouring in through the window, one leg at a time. Ah, shit. Do I run outside the front door? What if there are more men outside to chase me down? Side door? Too close to the bathroom. So I bolted up the stairs as carefully and silently as I could. I heard my dog barking incessantly, not in a panic, but excitement. Happiness. I closed my bedroom door behind me as quietly as possible. I didn't shut it all the way so as to not make any noise. Cell phone. I picked it up and wondered who would come quicker, 911 or my mom, who was at work less than a mile away. I dialed her number. In a whisper. Mom, there's somebody in the house. The creak of his footsteps on the stairs. Shit, I had to think fast. I ducked underneath my desk. I could hear one step at a time as he slowly ascended the stairs. It was kind of like a movie. I quickly dialed 911. That's when my bedroom door slowly opened. His head peered around it to scan the room. That was it. He saw me. I dropped the phone before I could hit call and instinctively put my hands over my head as he rushed at me with a crowbar flying through the morning air. Please don't hurt me, I said. Don't scream, don't say anything. With a gloved hand, he struck me in the face, sending my glasses flying. Now I'm blind. Fell to the ground and squatted with my hands over my head. He took my cell phone. I was shaking and my mind was racing. I'm going to die, I thought. He dangled the crowbar over my neck. I could feel the iron tip graze the skin. He was standing over me. How much will this hurt? How long will it take? What will it feel like having a crowbar in my skull? My mom is on the way home. Not her too. This is it. I'm screwed. He rummaged through my things on my desk. Then there was silence. Is he still in the room? How many people are inside my house? I don't want to know. I heard the house getting trashed downstairs, and I could hear my dog jumping and barking at the invader or invaders, and I could hear them hushing him in a baby voice. Quiet again, for what felt like hours. I heard my name, and I was stunned and confused. Heard it again. My mom. I ran down the stairs. The front door was wide open. There she was in my living room. Bursted into tears and told her everything. I was still in a panic. Was he still in the house? Was he hiding? Called 911. They came and investigated. A pillowcase to stuff the items in. My iPod, speakers, a brand new camcorder, laptop, and leather jacket. For disguise. Were the items missing? I spoke with a forensic artist. The cops drove me around the neighborhood to take a look at suspects they stopped on the street, but he was never caught. After everything was settled, I needed a shower. I cried when I had to scrub the tub of muddy footprints. My post-traumatic stress terrorized my life. I had to sleep in my mom's room. I kept a knife under my pillow. Everywhere I went, thought I saw the man who robbed me, not only of my personal belongings, but also of my overall sense of safety. It didn't help when at school the principal made an announcement about the break-in on the loudspeaker. He told the entire building that I let my attacker in and referred to him as a gentleman. This twisted the story completely. So much so that a rumor went around school that my attacker assaulted me and that I liked it. A whole lot has happened since then, and now I'm much happier, but I still feel the effects of PTSD today. The scary thing here is that he was a landscaper. My family never had enough money for landscaping, but both of our neighbors did. Landscapers are given access to people's yards, sometimes when they're not home, and have plenty of time to scope out unlocked windows, access points, etc. You probably didn't expect anyone to be home because I didn't answer the door. The moral of the story is to always answer the door. Or if you don't feel safe answering the door, make a noise to signify that you're home. And of course, call the police first. I was looking for a story that I posted a while back, but I think I deleted it on accident. By far, this has one of the craziest and scariest moments of my life, and in light of recent events going on in my life, has resurfaced in my mind. I lived a pretty sheltered life as a child. I'm an only child, and as is sometimes the case with only children, I lived an extremely overprotected life. My mom drilled the stranger danger in my head since preschool and would always stress the importance of being safe. Never go into a bathroom by yourself. Never get into a stranger's car. Never drink from an open bottle. Always ask for permission. Always stay within adults' eyesight. I have to admit that half of the time it went in one ear and out the other. As a preteen, I thought I knew it all and hated the constant nagging. However, I get where she was coming from now. My mom was a recent widow and was adjusting to the role of mom and dad, trying to shield me from the horrors that I am only now beginning to see. We lived in an area that used to be a quaint little dairy town, but over the years had gone downhill and became crime-ridden. The dairy farm fell out of business, and in its place, they constructed homes. It wasn't a bad place to live, but it wasn't the best either. I grew up thinking it was a common occurrence to hear helicopters fly by, announcing that they were looking for somebody. The cross street from my house led to a park that was known for gang activity, where almost every weekend somebody would either be found dead or beaten up. But it was okay because we didn't live on that end of the street, I thought. We knew most of the neighbors, and if we didn't know them by name, we at least knew what they looked like. Despite it not being the best neighborhood, it was pretty quiet overall and we felt safe enough. By the time I was in 7th grade, I finally had gotten some freedoms. My best friend Tiffany and I would take turns spending the night at each other's houses, but most of the time she would come to mine. Tiffany had a little brother that would always pester us, and she liked coming over to my house because we could talk about boys without her little brother trying to eavesdrop. I think my mom preferred it that way too because she was much more lenient with us, knowing that we are safe at our house. She would even sometimes go on her daily walks and leave us home by ourselves for about an hour or so, and we loved this. I'm not sure what happened or what we did this particular day. Probably ate pizza, sat on my front porch, outside as the sun set, and listened to the radio at way too high of a volume. Perhaps this was even one of those nights my mom left us home alone for a while. I wish I could say I saw something out of the ordinary or felt uneasy, but I didn't. After it got dark, we retreated to my room. My room has 2 windows. One faces the backyard and the other faces the street. I like natural light as much as possible, so as usual, the blinds were open. Even though it was now dark outside, which meant people could see in but we couldn't see out, I still left them open. I was too lazy to climb onto my bed to close them and had a false sense of security, knowing there was a tall pine tree directly in front of my window. With the tree in front of the window, I felt protected, almost as if my mom were invisible to the outside world. As the night grew quieter, we decided to build a fort out of sheets and tell scary stories. By this time, it was really late at night, and my mom was fast asleep in her room. After the first story or two, I started to grow uneasy and got up to close the blinds. I was creeped out, thinking somebody could be lurking outside, peeking in, but figured it was all in my head because of the stories we were telling. We got through a couple more classic stories, like the Hook Killer and stuff. Started talking about true ghost stories, things that relatives claimed they saw or heard. Our eyes were watery, hearts pounding, and muscles clenched when suddenly there was loud, furious banging on my bedroom window. It wasn't a knock that grew into a series of louder knocks. It was like an angry one that you felt throughout your body. My heart was pounding in sync with each subsequent knock. I sat there frozen, not knowing what to do. My mind was frantically trying to make sense of the situation. It just didn't make sense that somebody would be knocking on my bedroom window so late at night. We have an iron gate that surrounds our house, and it's pretty loud. I was surprised that we didn't hear the gate open. Even then, the front door is 5 feet from the gate. Why didn't they knock at the door first? My room is all the way in the back and wasn't even the first window with the light on. You pass by 2 other windows before you get to mine. A million questions are running through my head, and my brain comes to the only possible conclusion. It's Tiffany's little brother trying to scare us. Yeah, because it makes sense that a 10-year-old boy walked over to my house in the middle of the night to scare us. In what felt like ages, but was probably only a matter of seconds, I finally came to the realization that it wasn't her little brother. The knocks continued. They were loud and angry, yet nobody was saying anything. We were both frozen in fear. I just wanted to stay hidden in the fort where I couldn't be seen. What if whoever was knocking was peeking in through the cracks in the blinds and watched me as I crawled out from under the sheets? The thought of that made my every muscle weak. Then silence. The knocking had stopped. I felt my body ease up a little bit. Maybe who was ever there had left, and, cue teenage brain, we decided to go investigate. My mom was blissfully unaware of what was going on, still fast asleep. We slid out of the fort and tiptoed down the hallway towards the front door. Adrenaline pumped through our bodies as we decided one of us would sneak to the front door and look out the peephole or window and see if we could see something. Neither one of us wanted to be the one to do it, but it was my house, so I volunteered. All the doors were locked and the windows had bars on them. I just had to be as quiet as possible. Beneath every step, I took the wood creaked and groaned. After a few minutes, I finally found myself standing at the front door. My whole torso felt numb as I inched my face closer to the peephole. Holding my breath, I look out and I suddenly feel hot and cold at the same time. I didn't know whether to keep looking out or slink back down. I think a little part of me had convinced myself that the porch would be empty that night, but instead, standing on my porch was an unfamiliar man. I had no idea who this man is, but he is standing awkwardly close to the door. Something about it just didn't seem right. What threw me off the most was that he was just pounding on my bedroom window 15 or so minutes ago, and now he was standing at the front door so calmly and quiet. It was as if the roaring avalanche had turned into a falling feather. With my stomach in my throat, I snuck back to the hallway where Tiffany was waiting for me. All I could say was, "There's a man out there." "Immediately," she says. "Go tell your mom." It wasn't a question, but a demand. We ran into her room and urgently told her, "Mom, someone's knocking." She must have sensed the urgency in my voice because she sprung up and told us to stay in her room with the door closed, and instructed us not to open the door no matter what happened. We stood behind that door for what seemed like ages, trying to listen. The front door was too far away, so all we heard was silence. Finally, we hear footsteps coming toward us. It was so quiet around us that I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I about had a heart attack when my mom's bedroom door started swinging open. It was my mom. She told us not to worry about it and that the man was gone. This left me with a million questions, but she was very vague. What did he want? Nothing. Who was he? I don't know. She shooed us back to bed and we complied. The adrenaline had started to wear off and I was now exhausted. We didn't stay up and speculate or talk. That was it, and it was the end of the story. For now, at least. The next day, I was sitting in my room and heard my mom talking to someone. I've always been a very quiet kid. Even as a baby, people would often forget I was around. I'm quiet, but I hear everything. I stopped what I was doing, probably downloading music on Napster or something, and listened. My mom was telling her friends about the man. Apparently, she opened the door and through the screen asked the man if he needed any help. The man stammered as if trying to think up a story and introduced himself as the neighbor. He said that his mom was sick and he was going around asking for money to help buy her medicine. Concerned but also trying to poke holes at his story, my mom asked him what her name was in case my mom knew her. The guy didn't give her an answer, or gave a vague one and then pointed in a general direction, saying they lived at that house over there. My mom didn't buy it. She knew everybody that lived near us, and she had never seen this man before. She probably should have just closed the door at this point and told him she didn't have any money on her, but she didn't want to make him mad. She didn't know if he was armed or dangerous and thought, maybe he's just a junkie and will run off if I give him some cash. Luckily, she had fallen asleep in her clothes, so as she reached in her back pocket, she found $5. Change from the pizza we had ordered earlier. She unlocked the screen door and handed him the cash. The man started getting more aggressive and growls. "That's all you got?" Now, my mom is starting to sense something more sinister in the man. He's not just a junkie, or if he is, he's a very aggressive one. My mom then lies to him and quickly tells the man, "Yes, this is all I have. We live day to day here, and $5 is actually even more than I should spare, but your mom is sick and I feel bad. She definitely needs this money more than we do right now." Not satisfied by her answer, he continues to demand more cash. My mom realizes that this man is not taking no for an answer and begins to bluff. She tells him that she'll go get her husband. Maybe he has some cash on him. We really don't have any more cash, but maybe my husband has some on him. I would hate to leave a neighbor in need. Your mom must really need that medicine, Tim. At once, the man's demeanor changes as he mutters, "No, that's okay," and treks out of there. I don't know what would have happened if the man had called her on her bluff, but thinking a man was present scared the heck out of the guy enough to drive him away fast. I grew cold, thinking that he probably thought Tiffany and I were home alone. He must have been watching us and was planning on breaking in. Cue teenage brain. Oh, well, he's gone. Gotta go download that Usher album. Disclaimer. I'm not sure if the following event was related, but due to its close proximity to the previous one, I think it's definitely worth mentioning. The following week, I was waiting for Tiffany's mom to pick me up to go to school. We lived 2 houses away, so they would always swing by for me in the morning. I usually would be done getting ready before they arrived, so I would head outside to the front yard and wait for them out there. Sometimes I would go climb a tree in the front and look for the bird eggs. Other times I'd just search for 4-leaf clovers. I was walking around not paying attention to my surroundings when I heard what I can only describe as what I would imagine a gun with a silencer sounds like. A quiet little pew, followed by a loud noise, which I later realized was glass breaking. Stunned, I looked around. What the heck was that? All I saw was a white van drive by. I looked over at my neighbor's house and noticed that the window to their car was completely shattered. Shards of glass everywhere. I still didn't quite put 2 and 2 together until I saw the same white van drive by, the driver staring me down. I felt a sense of unease and wanted to run back inside. For some reason, though, I didn't. I had too much pride and didn't want to give them the satisfaction of knowing they scared me. Also, I thought if I ran inside, they would maybe think I was a snitch and would retaliate more. I played dumb as if I didn't notice anything, and they drove by again. And once more after that. Tried to not look at the van as it drove by, but each time it drove by, I could feel the driver's gaze on me. Soon after, Tiffany's mom came by and took me to school. I don't know if the man drove by a 4th time. Never told anyone about the van. Luckily, nothing ever happened after that. This happened to a friend of mine who lived in the same neighborhood as me when we were about 8 or 9 years old. My friend E and her family lived just a few houses down the street from mine. We lived in a neighborhood where almost everyone knew each other. The biggest worry we ever had was that some outsider would come into the neighborhood and cause trouble. Some people left their homes unlocked because we felt that safe. There was an incredibly nice family that lived directly across the street from E's house. A mom, a dad, a 16-year-old son, and their other mentally challenged son who was 22 years old. I'll call him Tim. Tim was always home because he wasn't employed due to his disability, but his parents were working full-time, and his brother had school. All day, every day, he would be outside waving and smiling at anyone who drove or walked by. Big smiles, showing all of his teeth and sometimes giggling, just out of the pure excitement and happiness of interacting with other people since he spent most of his time alone. He was not creepy per se. One day, E was sick and didn't go to school. Even though she was only about 8 or 9 years old, E was allowed to stay home sick by herself. Plus, her mom was going to be home around 2 o'clock anyways, since she only worked part-time, and the neighborhood was safe enough. E locked all of the doors except the one that led into the garage. They used this as their front door because it was easier in those cookie-cutter homes to just open the garage, pull in, get out of the car, close the garage, and walk into their house through the unlocked door that led from the inside of the garage to the inside of their home. This is obviously not the safest way to protect your home from intruders, but we literally all did it, as if a flimsy garage door could keep anyone from getting into it if they wanted. The worst part is that they had an outside cat and kept the garage door cracked just enough for him to get inside for his food or shelter if he needed be. So E's asleep, feeling sick and with a fever. All the doors and windows are locked, except the door leading to the cracked garage door. Tim was bound to know she was home alone since he was outside the front of his house all the time. E wakes up to pounding on the front door. Startled, she walks downstairs and looks through the peephole. It's Tim. She cracks the door and he says something along the lines of how he notices everything and would guard her home since she's home alone. She said thanks, but there was no need to, and to have a good day. It was beautiful weather. He looked pissed. He got angry and said, "You think I can't do it because I'm dumb, but you watch and see because I'm not dumb." She said, "Sorry, and I didn't mean it like this, but I have to rest now." She dozed off and woke up to a noise downstairs in the kitchen, the room the door from the garage led into. She hadn't heard the garage door open, but she was sick, so she figured she was deep in sleep and just hadn't noticed. Completely disoriented from time, she looked over at the alarm clock. It was 10:20, way too early for her mom to be home. At that moment, she heard noises from downstairs again. She didn't call out. She had been sleeping in her parents' room and ran into their bathroom, slamming the door loudly. Then she remembered their bathroom door had no lock on it. The noise she made slamming the door alerted the intruder to where in the house she was at, and big footsteps started coming upstairs. She moved quickly and quietly to her parents' closet, which was on the other side of the big room. She closed the doors and hid behind some clothes, all the time thinking how somebody would have gotten inside. She remembered that the garage door was cracked for the cat, slightly but not close enough for a thin person to slip under. Tim walks into the bedroom. Tim is tall and thin. She can see him through the slatted closet doors. She saw that he was holding a knife and did everything she could to not scream. He quickly went to the master bedroom where she was just moments before. These cookie-cutter houses only had about 3 floor plan layouts, so it wasn't hard for him to find. He looked inside the bathroom and didn't see her, then started making loud throaty noises like somebody would if they were frustrated. While pacing the entire house, she stayed in the closet for hours, even after she heard him exit through the front door. She stayed until her mom got home. She was crying hysterically and told her mom what happened. Had she not been so upset and had one of their kitchen knives not been left by the front door, her mom might have blamed it on being delirious from a high fever, because nobody would expect him to do this. The police were called and an official report filed. I'm not sure if he had any charges pressed against him, because after she told me the story once, she refused to talk about it again. I overheard her parents a few times talking about the situation, with my own parents, but never heard what the consequences were. E was so traumatized she went to therapy afterward for several years, and still wouldn't talk to anyone about it because she didn't want to remember or relive the experience. We even moved into an apartment together years and years later for college purposes. She never talked about Tim. It was like he never existed, and I never asked. I noticed she always locked the front door, which she should, of course. Always locked the door that led to the patio/balcony, even though we were on the 7th level, and always locked her bedroom door, onto which she added an additional lock. And when she locked all of those doors and the windows, she always checked like 3 times. Every single time. I often wonder if there was more to the story than what E told me. We were kids after all, and sometimes kids don't know how to explain things they don't understand. It's terrifying to think about what his intentions were, and if he perhaps did find E, and something else happened. As horrifying as the experience must have been for her, he made a huge statement in the neighborhood for everyone to be more careful. I will always make sure everything is locked, and I don't ever want to meet you again, Tim. This story extends from 8th grade middle school to my freshman year in college. I'm 24 years old now, so this must have begun in 2008. I was raised in a Korean household with strong Christian beliefs. Every summer and winter, there would be a youth retreat where all the teens in our church would go to one big joint retreat with counselors and teenagers from churches in and out of state. I met my best friend, Hannah, there. She was from Philly and had a pastor who was named Alan. After these retreats, everybody would add each other on Facebook and keep in touch. I remember a day or two after the '08 summer retreat, Pastor Allen would often reach out and ask how my walk with God was going since the retreat and if I ever needed someone to speak to. I could always confide in him. This didn't alarm me at the time because counselors would keep in touch all the time. I always kept our conversations brief considering the fact that I was shy and timid. Over the years, I'd always see Pastor Allen at retreats and was friendly with him. Nothing strange happened other than his persistence with keeping in touch with me on Facebook after retreats. I slowly stopped talking to him, and eventually we didn't speak at all. But this is where it gets weird. One day, after our summer retreat in 2011, I got a friend request from a woman named Sumiko. I noticed we had a lot of mutual friends from the retreat, so I assumed she was a counselor there. She messaged me immediately after I accepted the request. She and I became quickly acquainted. At the time, I was 15, and she was everything I needed in an older sister. Although we never met, I let my naivety get to me and confided in her about my teenage girl troubles. After months in, I remember walking into church and asking one of my youth leaders if they met a Sumiko at the retreat. He said he never heard of her. I asked him if he could check the roster, and he did, only to find out there was no Sumiko on the list. That's when things started to get super eerie for me. I panicked and went home to block Sumi on my Facebook. I saw on her page that the only person who continued to tell her it was nice seeing her was Pastor Allen. Nobody else from the retreat seemed to really be interacting with her. It all started to freak me out. I blocked her and unfriended Pastor Allen. I remember no longer attending these church retreats. A few days later, I received an email telling me that Sumiko was going through a hard time because of me, and that the email is coming from the mental hospital that she was staying at. They told me it was all my fault. I was a junior in high school under high amounts of stress from SATs, and I deleted the email because I just wanted to forget about it all and focus on studying. Shortly after, I started to receive really unfriendly anonymous messages on my Tumblr. They would tell me that I was going to burn in hell for eternity if I continued to stray from God. And they continued all the way into my senior year in high school. I always deleted and ignored them, or I'd reply sarcastically and laugh at them with my friends. Eventually the messages faded and I didn't hear much from them anymore. In 2012, I got accepted to a close-by Christian college, and I moved into my dorm. My dorm floor decided to have a little icebreaker meeting to help us get comfortable. I met another Korean girl and we began talking about our similarities in our childhood, being raised Korean with Christian parents. I opened up to her about my encounter with Pastor Allen, and midway through the story, I saw her face slowly dropping and getting pale. She told me she had a very similar encounter with a pastor she knew, and that he seemed like it might be the same man working with the youth in an all-Korean church. I asked where she was from, and she replied with the same state that Pastor Allen was from. She then asked me if the name of the pastor was Allen. We had the same predator in our lives at the same age. I'm not sure where Alan is now, but I hope that he has not harmed any little Korean girls, or anyone for that matter. It's absolutely disgusting. He was borderline 60 years old when I was 14 to 15. It makes me sick knowing people prey on children in the most vulnerable ways. It ruined a lot of my perspective on Christianity as well. It's horrible to take something so spiritual and take advantage of a child with it. So, Pastor Allen, with a creepy young Asian girl fetish. Let's never meet again. Okay, so this just happened to me, female 28, and I'm sure I will not be able to sleep. My boyfriend is not answering the phone, and I need to get this out. My company organized an event for the clients and the staff at a luxury hotel. Everybody partied, and I got into my room an hour ago. It's 3:27 in the morning here. Like, I don't know, 15 minutes ago, a guy entered my room with a bottle of water. It woke me up. I was super scared. He says that somebody came from my room to order a bottle of sparkling water. Weird explanation. There is a minibar, and there is a corridor in the room before entering where I am in the bed. So basically I am half naked in my bed. He comes closer to me at the level of the table, apologizing for the inconvenience, but he is still there, and I kid you not, he starts talking to me, saying how he is going to be in trouble and stuff, and how someone called and he is so sorry, and the others got in the hotel super drunk, and it must have been a mistake. I swear he had been standing super close to my bed for 5 minutes, and I was so shocked I was just saying, no, it's okay, I just got scared. Really no problem, just go. Well, he says he doesn't see me well and asks my name. Twice, he says. Well, so I guess I wish you a good night then. Then kisses me on the cheek, like we French do, but once again, I'm half naked in my bed, dead scared, and he is in a suit, all dressed. Literally, I don't even know what I could have done. He left after the longest minute saying how he was sorry and how he would appreciate that I don't tell anyone. And now the phone in the room just rang. I don't know if I should still be scared. Was he just confused by the mistake? I'm super scared, though I cannot think right now and my heart is racing. I need to have some rational feedback after this, really. Update 1. I am okay, by the way, 34 hours later. So, this is a story that happened to my mom's friends in Korea like 10 years ago. Every time I hear this story, I still get the chills. My mom's friend lived in an apartment complex in Seoul. She was a stay-at-home mother with a young daughter, and her husband worked during the days. One day, she was coming home from running errands with her daughter and got into the elevator in her building. When she got on, she noticed that there was a man wearing a cap and a yellow raincoat, and he kept his head low so that she couldn't really see his face. She immediately felt really uneasy and made her daughter stand to her side, furthest away from the man. What made her feel even more uncomfortable was that when she pressed the button for her floor, there was no other lit number. And on top of that, she noticed that she was carrying something wrapped inside newspaper close to his side. Things started to click in my mom's friend's head, and she started to panic and decided to take out her cell phone and pretend she was calling home to her husband, who was obviously really not at home and at work. She started saying things like, "Oh, I'm on the elevator and about to get off. Can you get the door for me?" And making it seem like her husband was waiting at home. When the elevator did reach her floor, I think she lived on like the 12th floor or something, she quickly got off and grabbed her daughter and started to walk as fast as she could to her apartment. She noticed that the man also got off on her floor and was slowly following her down the hallway. When my mom's friend got to her door, she started to bang on it and shout, "Hey, I'm home. Please open the door," and kind of pretended like he was coming to answer the door. Upon seeing this, the man in the yellow raincoat started to walk away back towards the elevator. When he seemed to be far away enough, my mom's friend quickly picked up her daughter and slid open the door's passcode thingy. This is usually how people get into their homes in Korea, and started to frantically punch in her key code. But the problem was that the buttons would make sounds, so the man knew that nobody was going to answer the door for her, and he turned around and started to run back towards her. My mom's friend at this point was practically screaming, and when she finally got her door to open, the first thing she did was throw her daughter in through the door. When she got in herself, she saw that the man was pretty much inches from the door, but she managed to shut it and lock it before he could wedge his hand or weapon into the door. Afterwards, looking through the door's peephole, she saw that the man was walking away back towards the elevator. Several months later, my mom's friend was watching the news, and there was coverage of the capture of a serial killer named Yoo Young-chul, who used to kill a lot of prostitutes. She told my mom that she could never forget the dread she felt when she saw the too familiar yellow raincoat and hat that he was wearing when apprehended. When I was a kid, I lived in a pretty normal, semi-rural suburb of a major US city. When this started in 1997, I was 6. My brother was 3 and my half-sister was 18. My sister made the dean's list at her university her first 2 semesters, so we went out to dinner to celebrate. The 5 of us, along with my grandparents, went to a seafood restaurant chain in a nearby city. It was connected to a mall and our table was by a window that looked out into the hallway of the mall. Shortly after ordering, I looked up from my coloring to see a woman staring in the window at us. She had long, stringy, mousy-colored hair, big glasses, and a longish olive-green coat. She made me nervous from the get-go. Next time I looked up, she was no longer in the hallway of the mall, but in the restaurant. She was standing at the host stand, ignoring the host's questions about how many people she would be dining with. She was still staring at our table. Eventually, she requested to be seated at the bar, where she could still see our table. I finally pointed out to my grandmother that somebody was staring at us. She pointed it out to the waiter, and he said that unfortunately there wasn't much that he could do unless she actually harassed us. So we finished our meal uneasily, all of us aware that this woman was staring. After dinner, we walked around the mall. The woman followed us into American Eagle, which at the time wasn't so teenager-oriented, and that could have been coincidental. But afterwards, she followed us into Limited Too, a clothing store for young girls. She didn't look at any of the clothing, just my mom, brother, sister, and me. My mom told an employee that the woman had been following us and she left the store. She sat on a bench outside and watched us while we purchased clothing for me. She followed us the rest of the evening, never going into the stores after us, just throughout the mall. My dad, who had been pretty nonchalant about the issue at the beginning, finally was getting creeped out and we left. A few weeks later, I saw the same woman in a car outside of my summer daycare. I began to cry and told the aide that the woman had followed us around the mall. The aide went up to the woman and asked her to leave or she would call the cops. We had on occasion had other creeps watch the daycare's playground and cops had to be called. Then she came to our church. It was almost September at this point, with these events starting in June. She attended one service, sitting on the opposite side of the congregation area from where we were. There were 3 sections of pews, one straight out from the pulpit and stage, and 2 on the sides at a 45-degree angle from the stage. My family was on one side and she was on the other. We informed the pastor, and he targeted her in a very pastorally way, inviting her to new member classes, asking how she found out about the church, and what drew her to this church, etc. She apparently was fairly unresponsive and never showed up again. We didn't see her again for a few years, at least not in any way that was as obvious as it was in 1997. My sister swears she saw the woman on her university's campus a few times her sophomore year, 1997 to 1998. My mom and dad thought they saw her at a local music festival in the summer of 1999. I thought she was in a museum while on a school field trip in 1999. Started crying and was basically told I was imagining things by my teacher. In 2001, she showed up again. Every year, the Girl Scouts had a big slumber party at my elementary school. All of the Brownie and Junior troops had dinner, played games, had events, worked on badges, and had a big sleepover in the gym. The elementary school I went to had these gates that closed off sections of the school, I assume for security reasons. The offices, gym, cafeteria, and health room were all on one end of the L-shaped building. The rest of the school was closed off to us by a locked gate. I walked out of the gym and looked down the hallway into the locked bar, and a few classrooms down there was a janitor. It wasn't just a random after-hours janitor though, it was the woman. I bursted into tears and ran and hid in the bathroom until my troop leader called my mom. She picked me up and took me home. On Monday morning, my mom inquired about the woman with the school. It turns out that she had been hired as an after-hours janitor by the district about a year prior. She had worked at a different school for about a year before transferring to my elementary school, a few weeks back before I saw her. My mom told the school about the incidents in the late 1990s, and the school seemed skeptical. I ended up getting cast in the school play for a few weeks later, and would be at school after hours, so same time as this woman. She was often at the gate, staring into the gym, watching our rehearsals. She must have started at 4 p.m. since she was never actually in the gym, only on the other side of the gate, and that's when they shut the gates. I told the director that the woman was watching, having realized that people thought the stalking aspect of this was a figment of my imagination. The director did tell the school they saw the woman on the security camera watching us, rather than doing her job, and fired her. They informed my mom that the woman was fired as well. Once again, it all stopped in any obvious ways. I was driving with my dad one day and saw her in a car in 2002. My brother saw her at the park that his Boy Scout troop had an event in once. My sister saw her at the restaurant she worked at in 2002, as well, and refused to serve her, getting a coworker to do so. She said the woman never stopped staring at her. It stopped again until 2008. I was 18 and was at Culver's, a Wisconsin-based fast food and custard chain, with my boyfriend. We were at a table eating when the woman walked in. He visibly froze, just as I did. Apparently, his family had the same issue with the woman that we did. There were a few instances of her actually stalking them. His dad owned a restaurant for a time, and she would come in and ask people about the owner's kids, but refused to talk to the owner or would go silent if he approached. For them, this started in 2000 when he was 8-ish and his sisters were 5 and 1. Like my family, they saw the woman in the background for years, including at the elementary school that we both went to. This means that at least 2 families independently complained about this woman, and the school did nothing about it for months, even though she had allegations of stalking at least 4 students. We promptly left the restaurant. She didn't notice us, presumably because we were 16 and 18, pretty grown up with their crazy hair and piercings and skinny jeans. But she'd followed both of our families around, just watching from the background for years. I can't help but wonder how many other families she followed like that too. I'll never know what this man's intentions were, but I am thankful I listened to my gut anyways, even if it took me a hot minute to smarten up. At the time that this happened, I didn't think much of it until looking back on it from the perspective of an adult more mature and wiser. Now, as I revisit the memory of this encounter, I am convinced something more sinister was at play, but I'll never know for sure. I was 17, and as teenagers tend to be, a lot less cautious than a young girl of my age ought to be, in a new country completely foreign to her. I was on vacation with my family to escape the cold winter weather up north. My parents were very liberal about giving me the breathing room I desired, and I wasted no opportunity to use that to my advantage, as much as I was afforded. It was a family resort and nobody was all that concerned about anything happening. We all had our vacation blinders on, so to speak. Every night after the sun went down, I liked to wander off to the pool to swim and soak in the hot tub, while my parents stayed in their rooms. When you're basking in the lap of luxury at a high-end resort, you don't think about the potential for danger. In hindsight, I suppose this is why tourists are considered ideal targets for predatory activity. Being on vacation made me more sociable and, additionally, more trusting than I normally would be. I admit that the false security that came from being within the illusory security of this protected resort caused me to lower my guard substantially. The fact that I'd already been going to and from the pool area by myself every night, with no incident thus far, only heightened my cavalier nonchalance. While my parents gave me the breathing room to enjoy my independence, I was here to make friends and have a good time. I didn't care about much else. So, just like any other night during my stay, I was lounging in the hot tub, chattering amongst the guests, all of my worries completely forgotten for the moment. I was getting a lot of attention, mainly because it was apparent that I was Canadian, and all the guests amongst me were apparently fascinated by this. I was barraged with questions, some of which I could not decipher whether they were genuine or trolling. Yes, we do have heat and electricity up north. I kid you not, I was actually asked this. Amongst this group of people, I was particularly invested in this conversation I was having with a much older man, who came off as nothing but warm and friendly. He had claimed he too was on vacation with his family, but they were nowhere to be seen. In fact, he, not including me of course, was the only one who seemed to not know anyone there. Everybody else was with their families. I figured that was normal enough. However, because I too was vacationing with my family, and they were nowhere in sight either. What strikes me as odd, however, is how he seemed to be engaging only me in conversation and ignoring everybody else. He was nearly 3 times my age. Doesn't help matters. As the night progressed, people began retreating to their rooms, leaving just me, this man and a few others. It was around this time that he shared with me what room he was staying at before asking, innocently, where I was staying. Foolishly told him, but only the sectional area. Although he had asked which room specifically, I had enough sense to not divulge that much. Things didn't take a particularly unsettling turn until I began to notice how eerily quiet things had become. There was still some people around, but it was just me and him in the hot tub now. I took this as my cue to start heading back. Bidding him goodbye, I got up to leave, but he instantly stopped me, insisted that he walk me back to my room, as it's not safe for a pretty little thing like me to be wandering around the resort by myself at this late hour of the night. I took this with concern akin to a protective uncle, but waved off the supposed hospitality, insisting I would be alright. He became more persistent, switching from concerned guardian to fear-mongerer. He told me how bad things happen to young girls like me without an escort. As he droned on about the dangers that might surely befall me as a young female on vacation, with no parents around to guard me, a small defenseless young girl, I felt the first wave of unease wash over me. I shook it off and smiled warmly, telling him thank you, but that I would manage fine on my own. He seemed to deflate as his expression became more exasperated. At least let me walk you part of the way there until I know you're safe. This puzzled me. If there were predators lurking, how would I be any safer walking from the halfway point than from where I was now, besides it being a shorter trek? Nevertheless, this show of concern was beginning to wear me down. He had gotten me thinking about how dark it was now, and the vulnerable position I was in. He was right, kind of. I practically had a target on my back. Okay. I nodded after a moment of hesitation. I was young and naive and thought it to be an advantage to have somebody bigger and stronger walk with me. I knew I was incredibly foolish and a sheltered teenager, with far too much faith in humanity as a whole. Very unlike the cynical and distrustful woman I am now who always follows her gut. I also, as annoyingly typically as this sounds, did not want to be rude. Fortunately, I have since grown out of my people-pleasing complex and will not hesitate to say no when I feel weird at the first sign of a red flag, but I had yet to develop this quality then. I hesitantly relented. At the moment, my fear of coming off as rude to an adult overrode that of any subconscious or otherwise concern I had for my safety. His eyes lit up and he nodded approvingly. Good. Let's get going then. It's late and your parents will worry. I ignored the twisting in my gut and rose from the hot tub, shivering from the sudden exposure of the cold air. Suddenly feeling too exposed, I hastily fastened my towel around myself, padded towards the lockers. At this point, I was just determined to get back to safety and warmth in my hotel room. It was only as I was getting closer to leaving that I began to get this sinking feeling in my stomach that something about this whole night just wasn't right. My suspicions were further affirmed as I took note of my escort following me. The lockers were outside and the women's changing room was to the left of them. I was going to retrieve my clothes from the locker, change in the locker room, and then go. With this complete stranger who I didn't know at all. I noticed he was standing a little too closely now, and I instinctively shrunk away from him. This definitely wasn't right, but it wasn't until I was shakily pulling my top on over my soaked bikini top, having already decided I would skip the locker room, which regrettably accented my womanly curves a little bit more than I was comfortable with at the moment, and which he seemed to notice as well, that I decided I could not wander off with this strange man that I hardly knew. Any last bit of false security had waned away the moment I felt his eyes on me, watching me dress, his eyes clearly appraising my body. I shivered again, this time not from the cold. As I pulled on the rest of my clothes, I had already made my decision. You know, I really appreciate you offering to walk me back, but I think I'll manage after all. Thank you, though. He grew solemnly quiet, which stirred a growing sense of malice within me as I began to feel more and more validated in my decision to not go off with this man. Are you sure? He pressured. I would hate for anything to happen to you. I nodded more insistently and forced a smile. Nah, it's alright, I'll be fine, thanks. Okay, he said quietly as I practically started running for the exit. While still in earshot behind me, I heard him say, You be careful now. You never know who might be out there. As soon as I was out of sight, I began bolting and was stopped in my tracks, instantly by the second wave of impending dread to hit me that night. I decided against walking back on foot and headed towards the on-resort shuttle instead. On the way, on 2 separate occasions within the space of no more than 10 minutes, 2 older men in their 50s made a pass at me. And at the shuttle stop, a group of men in a car offered to give me a ride, but I ended up making it back to safety from the shuttle without any further incident. Later, I wrote it off as paranoia and convinced myself that he really was just a hospital older man with a young girl's best interest at heart. But now that I know from personal experience how the men that seem the nicest with seemingly good intentions can often be the worst predators, I am convinced I made the right decision that night. So this happened a few months ago. My best friend P and I had just gotten out of school. We decided to get ice cream after school, and before we know it, it's 6 p.m. We leave the ice cream shop, which happens to be right next to the liquor store. Small city. We notice this shady guy standing outside the store, and we try to brush it off, but there's just something not right about him. A woman leaves the liquor store, and she's dressed nicely in a dress and heels. She starts walking, and before we know it, the guy starts following her. My friend and I get concerned, so we decide to tail him a little bit to make sure he doesn't have any bad intentions. Things escalate when we realize that he's filming this woman and she has no idea. It's disgusting. He's following her and has his phone out trying to get a better video of what's under her skirt. P and I look at each other and have a mutual understanding. We know we have to do something, so we take a deep breath and somehow manage to put ourselves between the woman and the man. We hear him curse, but we don't dare turn around. We are spread apart, making sure there's no way he can get her on film. Mind you, we're both 5'1", 17-year-old girls. Our hearts are racing, but we don't move away until the woman safely enters a restaurant, which is about 2 blocks away. She's in the restaurant, but this guy does not want to give up. He's waiting outside for her. He's lingering and even tries to peer inside through a window. P and I know we have to tell the woman what's going on, just in case he tries something. So we step inside this fancy restaurant and spot the woman on a date with her boyfriend. Tap her on the shoulder and I fill her in. She's shocked that he followed her for 2 blocks and that she had no idea. I let her know that he's waiting outside and give her his description, just in case he follows her anywhere else. She thanks us profusely and even gives us a hug. P and I leave the restaurant feeling relieved because we both know that we cannot live with ourselves if something were to happen to her. I'm a 22-year-old female and come from the US, but am currently living in Germany for a work study. I am traveling alone, but I am fluent in German, and I've always been fairly confident in my ability to live alone and defend myself, considering I stand at about 5'11" and carry 3 different forms of self-defense on me at all times. I've been here for a little over a month, and I absolutely love everything about it, besides this experience, of course. This happened roughly 3 weeks ago. After exploring my semi-large home city in Germany for a few weeks, I wanted to check out a nearby country. I've always been jealous of how Europeans can travel. Countries like Americans can travel from state to state, and my dad generously offered to pay for my travels while I'm living here. So I wanted to take advantage of that and experience a different culture. After doing lots of research, I decided upon the Netherlands. I've always been curious about Dutch culture, and I was very excited to do some more exploring, even if just for a weekend. I chose a small city in the south of the Netherlands, so I only traveled about 4.5 hours to get there. I had some lovely Dutch food and got to experience the Saturday market in the city center, which was filled with local goods. Now for the juicy part. On my last day in the Netherlands, I decided to check out a local Dutch coffee shop. Most of you probably know, but some Dutch coffee shops sell weed for recreational use and have areas where you can smoke and talk to people. Since I've never been to anything like this before, I was super excited and nervous. I smoke relatively frequently back home, so I wasn't going into this completely blind though. When I walked in, I had to register for an account, and the staff took my picture and passport and gave me an account number. I was a little uneasy about this, considering I didn't want my passport and a coffee club account to go hands in hand, but I've heard that several coffee shops do this, so I wasn't super worried. I then went to the counter and bought the weakest strain they had. White Widow, I think, which is definitely not considered weak in the US. Also, it was like 5 for half a gram, so that was pretty damn fantastic. I didn't want to bring the bud across borders because I didn't want to risk getting torn in half by the German police, so I decided I'd find someone to smoke with and grab a train afterwards. It was only about 1:30 p.m. as I made my way to the chill zone, a hazy room filled with foreigners and locals, all ripping bongs and dragging blunts. Amongst quite a few 20-something-year-old men, I see 2 girls sitting alone at a table for 4, and I ask if I can join. They happily oblige and we start chatting. They introduced themselves as Alex and Jen. Both of them were Germans, and when I mentioned that I'm from the US, they got super excited, started gushing about how awesome California must be, to which I've never even been. Not even after a minute that I'm talking to Alex and Jen, some lanky, freaky looking boy looks over from a different table and says, "Oh, you're from the US? We were just talking about how we wish we could afford to travel there." Immediately after saying this, he sits down across from me, despite the fact that nobody invited him to. Looks-wise, this guy appeared to be anywhere between 25 and 30, relatively scraggly with big hazed-over brown eyes, shaggy brown hair, and a very large mouth, which was always slightly ajar. Though he was slightly unkempt, he seemed relatively normal, despite inviting himself to pop a squat with us. This lurky boy starts asking us normal questions. Where we are from, where we work, how do you like the Netherlands, and stuff. The way he spoke was slightly slurred though, as if he had been drinking, but I couldn't smell alcohol on him, and he didn't seem drunk. He was consistently hard to understand, with an accent that was possibly Dutch. For a moment, I thought he might have a mental disability, so I didn't want to be rude to him and say I couldn't understand him. It also occurred to me that he might just be attempting to flirt and failing miserably, so I didn't really see him as a threat. I mostly nodded at what he said or threw in a yeah for sure, here or there, while Alex and Jen were relatively quiet. Something about him was off-putting to me. I just couldn't figure out what it was. After a few minutes of barely coherent conversation, Alex asks this guy if he can roll us a joint since none of us know how to. He says yes and offers to grind our bud. We give him the go-ahead and he suddenly takes all of it and leaves the chill zone to grind it at the bar. This is where I started to get concerned. Tons of people in the chill zone had grinders right in front of them, and there was no reason for him to leave to grind our weed. I began to worry he might put something in it. Alex and Jen both admit that it freaks them out too, and I decide to keep an eye on him through the glass door. Though he had his back to us, I'm closely watching him when he turns around and gives me this wide toothy smile, almost like he was laughing. I instantly got the chills. He continued to stare directly at me, smiling, as he spent 10 minutes grinding our bud. This guy wanders back in and hands each of us our small bags of bud and then grabs a paper to start rolling. I am not shitting you when I say that he took 30 minutes to roll one loose, horrible joint. His hands were shaking the entire time, almost violently. I started to wonder if he was on something else. The joint immediately falls apart and he asks Alex, who was sitting directly next to him, to lick it and fix it. He's smiling and staring intently at her as she's about to lick it, and she says, "You really don't have to watch me do it, you know." He responds again with some incoherent jibber-jabber as I turn to the girls sitting behind me and ask if they could roll a joint for me. They do so in less than a few minutes. The crappy joint falls apart about 3 more times, and we decide to just smoke the one that the girls rolled, as we all wanted this guy to get the heck away from us at this point. I come up with a half-assed plan as we light it, and I say, "Hey, we appreciate you helping us, but these are my friends that I haven't seen since the last time I was in Germany, and we just really want to catch up and have some girl time. Seems nice enough." He responded with, "Well, you guys can talk with me right here. I don't have to leave." Alex immediately repeats the same thing I said, phrased a bit differently, and he says, "I'm standing here. You can pretend you're alone and just talk with me here." At this point, alarm bells are starting to go off. Stu isn't leaving, and I can't think of anything to say to make him go. Jen has been quiet almost the whole time. staring at the table, but Alex is starting to realize that we really need to do something. Alex says to him, "Please, we don't want to be rude. We just haven't seen each other in so long, and we really want to catch up one-on-one." He aggressively shoots back with, "How did you all meet then? Where did you meet? In what city? Why are all of your friends?" And then directed at me, "Why were you in Germany, and where were you?" Dang. Now I need a real story, or at least one convincing enough to shoo him away. Say something along the lines of, "I was visiting this big city in Germany to find an apartment for my upcoming work study, and I met them in a pub. Started talking, realized we had a lot in common, and decided to stay in touch since. I knew I wouldn't have a lot of friends when I moved here." Sounds legit. This guy nods and seems convinced enough. Alex immediately follows with, "So, can you please go back to your friends so we can talk?" He says yet again, "I don't need to leave for you all to talk." He then says we should start fresh and asks me and only me what my name is, while extending his shaking hand. Suddenly, every story I've read on here is rushing back to me, and I realize all the things I've done wrong. I told him where I work, live, where I'm from. Man, this isn't good. My name is my last saving grace. I blurt out a fake name. Trisha. He repeats my name, but doesn't tell me his. Now I've reached my limit. We tried being polite, but to no avail. We've spent over an hour dealing with this creepy dude, and we've all had enough of it. I look him dead in the eyes and sternly say, "You're making us uncomfortable. Please leave us alone." He leans in until he's only a few inches from my face, his eyes almost quivering, as he says in a quiet, low tone, "I know people at your work, people that are above you. You really don't want to mess with me, because I could ruin your life." As he says this, it's as though the slurring in his voice vanishes. I feel the blood draining from my face and my head starts tingling. I almost feel like I'm about to burst into tears or throw up. Maybe both. I grab my bag and say, "I'm going to leave. You're seriously making us feel weird, and I really don't want to talk to you anymore." And then the final blood-curdling comment from him, "I think we'll be on the same train. Now that I know where you live, I think it's time for me to go too." I rush outside in a panic, borderline hyperventilating, as Alex and Jen follow suit. We simultaneously say, "What the heck?" and hurry away from the coffee shop. We end up exchanging numbers and going our separate ways. Now for a slightly happier ending. After I sprinted to the train station, I realized that I had left my pre-marked bag at the coffee shop. I honestly hesitated, as I really didn't want to run into this guy again, but I really wanted my useless goodies, so I ran back. I stood outside, briefly explained to the security guard what happened and why I left so quickly, and he said, "We saw what happened and we kicked him out. So sorry for that. He's not allowed back here again," and handed me my bag. I honestly believe that without Alex and Jen there, things would have gone very differently. I think this dude had some seriously messed up intentions, and the only thing stopping him was the fact that we were all together. I came across this subreddit a few days ago and thought I'd share my experience. This happened to me back in 2005, right after I graduated from uni. I live in a small town near the outskirts of London. It's not creepy or out of the way or anything, but it can get quite deserted at night. The night in question, I and a bunch of mates were going to all get together and go down to Fabric in central London. I was getting ready to leave the house when my girlfriend Sarah called with a bit of a problem, prompting me to tell my friends that they should go on without me, and I'll meet them there. I hopped on the bus and headed to hers. A few hours later, I'd helped her sort through her crisis and was thinking I'd better make a move on and head to the club. I asked if she wanted to come. Several times she insisted that she felt better and wanted to stay at home. Knowing better than to test her resolve, I left it at that and called a minicab. I was waiting for the cab at the front of the driveway when Sarah joined me for the wait. We were kissing when the car drove up. This was my first sign that something was wrong. We didn't hear him pull up because he was driving really slowly with the headlights off. The only reason he grabbed our attention was because he turned on his bright lights at us. It was an old cream-colored Mercedes station wagon. I ignored whatever apprehension I had because I thought I just had an overactive imagination. Okay, so he pulled up quietly. So what? Knowing what I do now, I'm so happy Sarah never agreed to come with me. I got in the cab and told a guy who was in his mid-40s that I wanted to head to Fabric in central London. He just nodded his head while looking into his driver's side wing mirror. I said, "Did you hear me, mate?" He nods again, this time also letting a yes slip out. "That's quite a fare," he said, all the while staring at the window. That's when I realized what he was staring at in his mirror. Sarah walking back up to the driveway. I was about to react when she got to the front door, but the cabbie beat me to it, turning and saying, "Can't have the little lady going on unescorted now, can we?" All manner of deviance out there. This threw me a bit as his whole behavior was off, but I also knew that's what I would have done had it been the other way around, and maybe this guy had kids himself. I decided to just talk to him and break the ice, and after about 5 minutes I felt at ease as we slipped into a familiar conversation. Football and women. It was all okay until he started telling me about his ex and best friends, how they had been hooking up behind his back, about how he kicked the ever-living shit out of his friend for it. Then he started fixating on his ex, saying how all women were whores and liars and were only out for themselves, that men are only there to pay off their debts and wants. He even tried to justify a time when he kicked the shit out of her, saying that men can't be excused for their actions if appropriately provoked. Then it got even weirder. He started talking to me about men, trans men, how he liked that they were the best of both worlds, that they were something he could fuck, but that they were also wired like men and not out to get you. Those she-men are tighter than a twisted screw. I like it when they bleed a little on my you-know-what. Though some ladies are mighty fine, like that ass of yours. He turned to stare at me through the mirror, almost testing my reaction. I'm man enough to say that I was freaking the heck out by this point, not only at the conversation, but at the fact that the mobile phone I'd forgotten to charge had died halfway through its rant. Not one to show my fear, I asked him to stop off at an ATM so I could get cash out to pay him at the end of the journey. He agrees, and for a moment I feel like it's all going to be over in a second, when he says that before he does that, he needs to stop to take a piss. That's even better, I thought. I can sneak out when he's peeing and bolt off. He turned off the main road and went through a random residential area before we finally found ourselves going down a dirt road and heading towards the woods. "Mate, where the heck are we going? You can't take a pee anywhere," he replied, somewhere along the lines that it was safer in the woods. That's when I noticed it. This particular car had no unlock feature in the back, and a very quiet slow tug on the door handle revealed that the child lock was on. I was trapped. He stopped the car near the edge of the woods and turned and asked if I wanted to join him. I declined and said that I was in a hurry and asked him to hurry himself. This seemed to anger him and he slammed the door and vanished. I waited about 1 minute and tried to climb out the driver's side, but it was locked too, and I was scared that my movement had alerted the cabbie just outside. Having tried and failed to restart my phone, I looked around to see if he'd left a phone or some kind of device that I could communicate with, but nothing. After nearly 10 minutes had gone by, I worked myself up to smashing the windows, figuring that this was in no way a normal situation and that abnormal measures could be taken. Just as I was getting into position, I heard a loud crash. It sounded like a massive branch had just hit the leaves below. I froze, not moving a muscle, not even my lungs. I wanted to be able to hear everything just at that moment. As my ears slowly tuned in, I began to hear two very distinct sounds, but both in intervals. The first was a rustling sound, but it wasn't the wind. It sounded more like birds flying through the trees all at once. The second was a squelching slam. The slam only occurred 3 times, whereas the rustling was quite often. Then silence again. I decided not to wait any longer. My imagination was going wild as to what those sounds were, and I just wanted to get away as fast as my legs could carry me. I used to be on the track team. I leaned back and thrust my legs out as hard as I could and kicked the backseat window through. It shattered and I wasted no time in shimmying through the broken window and outside. That's when it happened. My eyes focused in the dark and I began to see that the ground was littered all around me with clothes. Children's clothes and the odd toy. I was so busy looking around that I didn't notice him walk straight up to me from behind and grab me by the nape. He was obviously way stronger than me. "Where are you going, friend? I still need to take you down Central." I noticed his shirt was off. He was sweating profusely and was covered in dirt. And in his hands he had a knife. A full-on kitchen knife, and there was something on it. I said, "What the heck, man? What the heck are you doing?" He replied something to the effect that he had some foul traps out in the woods and was checking on them for game. He offered to show me, recognizing that if I went with him, it would probably be the last choice I make. I twisted my body as much as I could and punched him square in the face. I ran as fast as I could. He yelled after me, "See you soon." I ignored him and kept running. Even though we had driven quite far, at least 5 or 6 miles, I still legged it all the way back and straight to the cops and told them everything I remembered. They said they could go and check it out and sent me home in a squad car. The next morning, I called Sarah and went over right away to check on her. I still wasn't over the way the creepy cabbie had been staring at her, and since he had picked me up from hers, he knew where she lived. I told her the whole story. When I was done, she just stared at me in disbelief, not sure what to say, and hugged me. At that point, the police rang, and I went outside to take the call. They told me that they went to check the specific area I mentioned, finding none of the clothes or toys I said I had seen. Neither was there any sign of foul traps or a knife. They did mention finding a few pieces of cut-up rope, but with nothing to go on, they just insinuated I was having a laugh at their expense. I then called the minicab company, figuring I could at least lodge a complaint against the wacko. The idea that this could have provoked him didn't enter my head at the time. They said they had no record of a car picking me up that night. One had been sent, but by the time it arrived, nobody was waiting. This creeped me out all over again. How had he found me then? Was it random? Was I chosen? Could he have been listening in to their private car radio network or something? I left Sarah's and headed back to mine, and she was going to join me after helping her mom do some chores, and I wanted to go chill for a while. I should mention at this point that Sarah and I are now happily married, going on 8 years, and that all is well. However, that day, after I got home from hers and took a shower, I wandered off to the window. What I saw sent a chill down my spine, and still does whenever I think about it. I saw it, that cream-colored Mercedes station wagon, and the crazy cabbie staring at me with such a cold, empty look on his face, until he slowly smiled and drove off. He told me I'd see him again. He wanted me to see him, wanted me to know that he could find me when he wanted. I still don't understand how he followed me or what his intentions were, and I have never told Sarah about this last incident. About a year later, I took out a loan and moved me and Sarah. We were engaged at that point, to another part of the country, and my parents followed soon after. Over the years, I've pondered what he was going to do, where he wanted to lead me, what the noises were, and how he had found me when he must have stopped to clean up the spot in the woods, but most of all, why he even picked me up that night. I suppose I should be happy it was me and not some other poor victim who might not have reacted as I did, but just in case, crazy cabbie, let's not meet. This happened some years back when I was in my last year of schooling. I was on a bus on the way to school when I happened to look up and met eyes with this guy. It happened by chance, so I quickly averted my eyes and disembarked the bus. From then on, I would have frequent chance encounters with him. My course happened to be on the same floor as another course, but on different sections of the building with the elevators in the middle. I would see him everywhere, in the corridors, at the elevator, etc. It weirded me out because he would attempt to say hi and smile at me. I didn't know him and have never seen him ever, so I would ignore him. Turns out he was studying at the course opposite mine. I chalked it up to coincidence, but still felt extremely uncomfortable. Told my friends about it, and they told me that the guy had some extremely disturbing violent tendencies, and had maybe even stalked other female students. Understandably, I freaked the heck out. The climax came one morning when I went to my classroom, which was really a project room for the final year students. I arrived late as always and went about setting up my station. The room is supposed to be locked and only accessible by a key card, but we keep the door propped open. All the desks are shielded with tall partitions and mine was shielded from the windows. Suddenly, the weird guy came into my classroom and went towards my table. He didn't even belong in this section of the building. Also, how did he know exactly where I sat if my desk was shielded from view? He saw me and I saw him, and I hurriedly attempted to feign sleep in hopes of chasing him away. He approached my table with a shoebox in his hands and asked why I was on the table and if I wasn't feeling well. My friend awkwardly told him that we were working. My friends were in a corner watching a variety show and laughing, obviously not working. He said he had something to give me. I stayed silent and continued pretending to be asleep. This lasted until he awkwardly went away. Later on, as I related this to my friends from the other course, they told me that he was extremely protective about the box and was extremely threatening to people in his class. Went something along the lines of, "If you look, I'll kill you." Problem was, nobody expressed interest in the box and the threat was unprovoked, so they got curious and peeked into the box to find that it contained dead flowers. Why would he feel the need to pick dead flowers and gift them to me in a shoebox? I felt extremely unsafe and uncomfortable and insisted my friends accompany me everywhere until it felt safe enough. The strange guy also never appeared again. This happened a few months ago. The context required it. At this point in time, I had just picked my mental health back up after an extremely traumatic non-consensual episode. You can guess what. And was still struggling with chronic inability to say no to people. I'm a 21-year-old gay trans man, and while I never had trouble passing, I'm still seen as very pretty and young looking. So I was at a young people's event at my place of worship, which is completely accepting of all sorts of new people, by the way. It was a lovely evening. I met a lot of great people, got a bit tipsy and had a great time. That is, until around 12:45 to 1 a.m. when things were starting to wind up. I went upstairs and met a man, looked approximately in his late 30s, called Tobias. Tobias was quite forward, complimenting my appearance, being familiar, asking about my sexuality, so I guessed that he was interested, but I didn't feel the same way. My place of worship has always been a safe place for me, so I assumed if I didn't flirt back, he would get the message. Shortly after, I went downstairs to put something in the bin and he followed me. When we were alone, he kissed me. I pulled away and told him, "Sorry, I'm not available." He said, "Don't worry, neither am I," and gestured to his wedding ring. I laughed it off, turned, and walked back upstairs. And as we walked, Tobias told me, "I can't believe I just did that. Nothing happened. That didn't just happen." I nodded and thought that was that. The evening was getting late. I decided to get home. I offered to walk a friend of mine to the station, and when she left to go to the bathroom, he asked where I was going. I said firmly, "I'm going to walk my friend to the station, and then I'm going home." She returned, and as we left, he decided to come along with us. I asked where he was headed. He said, "Oh, I'll go to the station for you." I reiterated that I was going straight home from that point. Along the way, my friend wanted to get another drink and hang out, and I agreed. We were chatting and all seemed friendly, but I was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with Tobias's behavior. He was constantly complimenting me, telling me I was amazing, special, and not like anyone he'd ever met. And even kept touching me, putting his hands on my neck and down the back of my skirt, still trying to kiss me. FYI, this is a tactic called love bombing, I think, and it is a big ol' red flag. He commented on some hickeys I had. Who was that? Whoever it was. You think they're better than me? Really better than me? You let a boy do that to you? I told him that it was someone I had known for a long time and reminded him that I wasn't single. He had kissed me around 4 times up to this point, and when he did, I would pull away, try and put distance between us, move my head so he wouldn't, laugh awkwardly, and say, "We are in a shop. Please don't. I'm not what you're looking for. You don't know me," etc. This man straight up tried to make out with me 1 meter away from some poor shopkeeper serving us. Squeezed my waist and commented on how skinny and small I was. Asked me how old I was and commented, "Wow, you look so young." He asked me if I was attracted to him and I shrugged, shook my head and said, "Sorry, I'm very into the person I'm with and I can't even look at anyone else when I have someone." At this point, I should have told him to screw off. In fact, I should have said that a long time before this. But when it's actually happening, it's surprisingly difficult to get a bearing on when you can start being rude. Which is exactly what people who behave like this rely on. A vulnerable person's fear of making a scene. Or else they actually believe that this behavior means the person wants to be persuaded. We all decided to sit on a bench as all the pubs were shut. Sat on the end and my friend was next to me. Tobias whined that I wasn't sitting next to him. My friend asked why that mattered and he said, "Oh, because I want him to." Never mind, I'm being too much. I'm going too far. I tried to steer the conversation away from him flirting, but he kept standing and walking to where I was sitting to kiss me, crouching by me and putting his hands on my knees. He didn't want to tell us how old he was because he was afraid I wouldn't like him, but did eventually confess he was 37. In an attempt to stop him being interested in me, I revealed that I was transgender and he put his hands up my shirt saying, "Wow, you really think I would judge you for that? You have no idea who I am. I see you." Side note, what is this, the Avatar? I would never care. I would still do everything with you. He meant sexually, by the way. I wiggled away as far as I was able and said something along the lines of, "Well, thank you, but I'm not interested." My friend had somehow misread the situation as me enjoying this behavior, probably because I'm a bloke. I texted another friend to call me so that I could get 5 minutes away from the situation, walked up the street, explained everything and made a plan, which was a really good idea, talking out loud about it. I finally registered that this wasn't right, that I was totally in the right to be uncomfortable and wanted to get the heck out. I returned and told everyone that I was going home. The second I came back, he tried to kiss me and told me he was worried and then tried to come looking for me. I moved my head so he couldn't and told him, "Please don't, I'm going home." I texted the friend I was with help, and she immediately started saying that we were going home. He should go home too, and she and I were leaving together now. He asked me, "What's changed? You've come back different. Who were you talking to? What's going on?" I told him, "I'm uncomfortable and I'm going home now." He said, "What are you talking about? Have I made you uncomfortable?" "Yes, I'm going home now." To this point, I can definitely see that my lack of rudeness and conflict avoidance tactics had actually made the situation much worse and given him the impression that I could be persuaded to do whatever he wanted, or somehow would let him on. So now that I've been absolutely crystal clear, he should back off, right? "Wrong," he said. "Wow, who were you talking to? What's happened? Whoever it is, don't throw this away. I know we had a connection. You're special." Said, "I only met you this evening. You made me feel uncomfortable and you should ask before you kiss people." Wow, I can't believe this. You're trying to turn this around on me. "I know you're drunk, it's fine. I just want to go home now." "Oh, I'm completely sober." "I'm not drunk." At this point, my friend stepped in and tried to assure him everything was fine and convince him to leave. He asked me for another kiss and I shook my head. "No, thank you." He said, "Don't throw this away," and tried to touch my face. I reiterated, "I met you this evening. I don't know you. I want to go home." He said, "Can I at least have a hug?" And immediately tried to hug me. Pushed him away and said, "I would rather not." He said, "Wow, you're making me feel uncomfortable now." I said I would rather not. Please respect my boundaries. I want to go home. My friend again tried to get him to go home. He said, "No, you're making me feel like I've done something wrong. I just want a hug." "Oh, I know what this is. You're just not used to people accepting you for who you are. You can't handle that I accept you and see you for who you are." "I mean, really?" I said, "That's not the case. I have plenty of people who accept me, but you've made me feel uncomfortable and I'm going home." At this point, I was stood up, backed against the edge of the bench with him standing barely a foot away. I had started shaking because I was feeling anxious, so I just walked away up the street. My friend stayed with him, convincing him to go home. He didn't follow us. I took her to the station and got myself into an Uber. The next day, I handed a report very similar to this to the security at my place of worship, and the dude was promptly barred from entry. I hope people can see the mechanisms of how this situation was set up and can find competence to be more outspoken than I was, because by being polite, I made the situation worse. I know it's not my fault, but I'm very grateful that I'm not timid like I used to be, and now I'm able to absolutely be firm, and if need be, rude about setting my boundary. Therapy is a hell of a drug, and it's doing me wonders. This story happened to me around 6 months ago. I've lived where I lived for 3 years. It's a nice apartment in an amazing location, but they were built in the late 90s. The last few years, the city I live in has had a massive population boom and people have been non-stop pouring in. Good weather, amazing economy, and cool place to do stuff always. Because of this, I have seen the landlord staff start to do heavy maintenance on the apartments to bring them up to date to attract more people to them. My neighbor lived in his apartment for something like 6 years before he ended up buying a house and moved. When he moved, the landlord immediately started redoing his apartment as one to bring up to date. The way that the apartment layout is, there are 2 stories. Where my bedroom is, on the direct other side of the bedroom wall, is the staircase in my neighbor's apartment. The way my bedroom layout is, has my bed right up against that wall. They were completely stripping this place clean. It was one of the first ones that they did such heavy remodeling to. For weeks, I would always see the workers over there painting and redoing the floors. A few days before this happened were no different. I left and saw them doing maintenance on the kitchen, and when I came home from work, they were gone for the day. Nothing unusual, not a single bit. The part that is unusual is what happened one particular night. I was awake around 1 a.m. watching TV in my room when I heard somebody on the other side of the wall slowly walking up the stairs and very obviously stopping halfway up. Where the person was stopping was directly where my head lay on the other side of the wall. I could feel him listening to me breathing. I immediately turned the TV sound off and sat there extremely quiet and still. I heard nothing for a few minutes, and then after what felt like an absolute eternity, I heard the person start walking the rest of the stairs to the second floor. My survival instinct kicked in instantly. It was very obvious that somebody was on the other side of that wall listening to me. I also knew that it was only a few days before this happened that I saw the maintenance redoing that apartment's kitchen. I knew that there was no way somebody already moved in that fast. I obviously couldn't see if there was movement in there from the window, but I had a good angle to see if anybody walked out. I sat there for about 15 minutes just staring outside to see if I saw anything at all. Nothing. I went back into my room and laid down in bed again. I didn't play the TV, just sat there waiting to hear something again. I was messing around on my phone for about 20 minutes in silence until I heard movement of the stairs again. This time though, the movement didn't start from the top or the bottom. The movement started in the middle of the staircase, meaning that the entire time I was sitting there in silence, this person was just on the other side of the wall listening to my every move. This terrified me, so I called the police. I gave them all the information of what was going on, and they informed me somebody would be out very soon. I went back to one room and watched out the window again. Only a few moments later, a police car pulled up and a cop got out to examine the building and apartment. He was looking around and shining his light in the windows. I heard him knock on the door and shortly after, could hear him talking to somebody but couldn't make out what they were saying. I was totally puzzled by this. The officer walked over to my door and knocked. I went downstairs and he informed me very nicely that somebody just moved in there. I laughed and was completely embarrassed. I even said to the cop that it was a heck of a way to meet your new neighbor. I felt embarrassed, but more importantly, felt very relieved about the entire situation. I brushed off the whole thing as just being late and my mind playing massive tricks on me. The next day, I went to leave my apartment when I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. I went outside and only took a few steps towards my car when I saw maintenance over there carrying out the old refrigerator. I was puzzled. I walked over to the apartment and I looked in the door that was wide open. The kitchen was still being worked on and not a single piece of furniture could be seen. I was legitimately speechless. I walked over to a maintenance man and said, "Didn't somebody move in here?" And he informed me no, and that the apartment wouldn't be ready for showings until at least 3 weeks. I ran back upstairs into my apartment and called my landlord. I asked her if somebody was staying there and she said absolutely not. Told her about what I experienced the night before and she was floored. She told me that they would change that apartment's locks immediately. She also suggested that I call the non-emergency line to the police department and inform them that nobody lives there. I did just that, and they asked me to come down to the station. I told them all the information in detail of what happened. They were able to quickly figure out what officer came out to check out the situation, so he could help identify the person who answered the door. The officer described the man in detail, and I confirmed that I have never seen him around the apartments before. There was a search around town for a few weeks, until the whole thing just sort of fizzled out. and I stopped hearing about it and started seeing fewer and fewer patrol cars randomly in the parking lot. After that night, I never heard anything in that apartment. Around a month later, an older couple moved in and they were very nice. When I saw the moving van pull up, I went to introduce myself to them, but to be completely honest, the only reason I went out there was to see if any of them matched the description of who the cops saw. Not even close. I'm certain that the person who was in that apartment got away with it. I had an extremely hard time sleeping the following weeks after that happened to me. I actually ended up moving my bed into the smaller second bedroom because it bothered me so much. I had zero idea what the intentions of this person were or what he was doing on that staircase, but it's easily one of the most chilling things that's ever happened to me. So, random man that's listening to me sleep, let's not meet again. I'll start out by saying that I'm not a writer by any means. I suck at it, but I will try my best. For a bit of backstory, my mom was dating an abusive prick at this time. We'll call him Ian. Because of Ian and the crazy fights they had gotten into, we couldn't lock up my house at all. He had kicked in both the front and back door to the house, and they were never fixed. My mother and Ian were at the bar all day, every day. I told you this so you know why the house wasn't locked up and where my parents were when this happened. This incident occurred when I was around 12 years old and my little brother was around 10. I was a pretty smart girl at this age and my brother was sick all the time, so he was very tiny and frail. My mother and Ian were at the bar as usual. When you opened my front door, it put you in the living room and you could see the back door. There was a hallway to the right that led back into the bedrooms, and that is where my brother and I were. We were in his bedroom with the door closed, playing something on the PlayStation. It was around midnight or 1 a.m. and we were playing and having a good time when I heard a weird noise. My brother didn't hear it and I didn't want to creep him out. I told him that I wanted to get a drink and told him to stay in the room and I would bring him something. To get to my kitchen, you would have to walk down the hallway in front of both the front and back doors because it was behind the living room. Kept hearing strange noises, so before I left out of my brother's room, I told him to get into the closet and work on our fort so that it would be ready when I was done getting our drinks and a snack. I raised my little brother for the most part and took care of him. I had a terrible feeling, a sense of dread. I could tell something wasn't right, and this was a way to get my brother to hide without scaring him. He frightened easily and had really bad asthma attacks, and at this time we had no inhaler or his breathing treatment machine for him. Good going, Ma. I knew if he started having an asthma attack on top of being scared, it wouldn't be pretty. Anyways, I left the back room and decided to see what was going on, because I was such a badass at 12 years old, but I had to protect my little brother. I started sneaking up the hallway as slowly and quietly as I could. I was terrified. I could feel that something was wrong. Before I made it to the end of the hallway, I heard a man. It sounded like he was growling. It was a deep, terrifying noise. Can't explain it, but the feeling that washed over me damn near made me puke. So I of course freeze. I have no one in this town. I don't know anyone, and my dad is living in a different state. My mom is at the bar drunk as heck. I was sitting there trying to gather the courage to see what was around the corner and going over my options when I heard my brother's door open. He sees me and the look on my face and freezes. I remember his eyes going so wide with fear because he must have heard the growl or whatever it was too. I motioned to him with my hands to go back in the room and he does. I gathered the courage to peek around the corner and what I saw still freaks me out to this day. It was horrifying. I saw a man probably around 6'6" and 300 pounds, sitting on my couch with a wicked grin on his face. That grin and the look in his eyes will forever be burned into my head. By some stupid luck, the man didn't see me. I so slowly snuck back to my brother's room. I slowly shut the door and started going over my options. My little brother was already, of course, horrified because of the growling noise this man was making. I'm so thankful that he wasn't the one who saw what was out there. I mustered my brave big sister face and calmly told him that there was a man that I didn't know on the couch and he needed to be very quiet, and I needed him to be brave and keep his breathing in check. My little brother adored me and looked up to me, so when I told him that I needed him to be brave, he tried his best. I told him not to move and he didn't. The first thing I tried was the window, but it wouldn't budge. It was completely stuck. I'm making myself stay calm for my brother's sake, but I know what's sitting out there. So, since the window was stuck, I decided to start looking for a weapon. My older brother lived here, and I know he had swords somewhere. I don't remember where he was. As I'm looking for a weapon, I hear the man sing, "I know you're here." Man, my stomach knotted up. The hair on the back of my neck rose, and I instantly got a cold sweat. And then I hear it. My little brother had started wheezing. Asthma attack. I hugged him, reminded him about being brave, and told him to sit still and focus on his breathing. I started frantically trying to get my window open, but it was stuck. I looked around and started moving blankets when I found my older brother's cell phone that he always forgot. I remember thinking that I was lucky and felt a bit of relief. I immediately called the police and told them what was happening, hysterical at this point but still remaining quiet. The dispatcher told me to remain on the phone so she could hear what was happening when the man started banging on our bedroom door. It had been about 5 minutes into the phone call when this happened, and I could no longer remain calm. I lost it. I started screaming. I mean, like a blood-curdling scream. The kind that would send chills down your spine if you heard it. I forgot to mention that our bedroom had the only working lock, so the door was locked. He was trying to get in and banging on the door. His banging got louder and louder. He was screaming to let him in when it went completely silent. Then he did the creepiest, most terrifying thing ever. He started laughing. You know I could just bust down this door in about 2 seconds, right, little girl? Tap, tap, tap. Now he's lightly knocking on the door and asking for me to open it. His demeanor completely changed. I then heard a scraping at the door. What I had imagined it was in my 12-year-old head was he was scraping the door with his really long fingernails or something. But that wasn't the case. Then I hear the police start screaming at him to get on the ground, put his hands up, etc. I heard him putting up a fight, followed by more yelling and eventually silence. After a few minutes there was a knock on my door, but at this point I was too terrified to open it. I thought that this nightmare guy was still there, so being in my hysterical state, I started screaming, "No, no, no, please," over and over again. I couldn't stay brave for my little brother anymore. I was on the floor holding him this whole time, convinced that we were going to die. Eventually I calmed myself a bit, and this time a female officer was at the door, so I opened it. There were about 5 cops standing in the hallway listening to me being hysterical. I refused to let go of my brother at this point, but we both ran to this female officer and just collapsed. We had been so scared. It turns out this guy was completely wasted and high on drugs. I remember the cops walking me up to him and having me stand in front of him to ask me if I knew this man. I didn't, but I'll never forget standing in front of this huge man, looking into his brown eyes that were completely bloodshot and filled with hatred. I'll never forget that growling noise that he was making, or the look of pure horror in my little brother's eyes. My parents were called and investigated for leaving us alone like that and for the doors being like that. My mom is a different person now. She doesn't drink and is now married to a cop. She has completely changed. I remember asking her about it later on, and she told me something that I didn't know. The man had a huge knife, so that's what he was scraping the door with. And he also had some rope, tape, and a tarp. I still don't know how he didn't get to us, or why he didn't just bust down the door to get us. It would have taken one half-ass kick from him to kick down the door. It was super thin. It creeps me out still, and I have had nightmares from it. My husband doesn't understand why I get so furious with him when he leaves the door unlocked at night. I work 3rd shift, so I'll come home and the door will be unlocked. It's infuriating because I then have to go through every room in the house and check the closets and the other places that a person could hide. I have 2 kids and they will never ever go through what I did. Sorry for my shitty writing style, but I wanted to tell my story after lurking here for so long. Back in my younger days, when I was still living with roommates, I had what turned out to be the most obvious of dangerous encounters. I was looking to move and I was about to leave to see a place in the perfect location with a good price, and 2 seemingly professional male roomies. At the last minute, my boyfriend suggested that he goes along because the place is nearby and they'll have to meet him at some point anyways. We get there and I introduce myself, and the one roommate seems a little taken aback at the fact that I had somebody with me. I suppose it could be seen as unusual to bring your boyfriend, but I figured, oh well, the damage has already been done. If they don't allow me to be their roommate simply because he's with me, I can't do anything about it now. Let's just see the place. The apartment is huge. We're both suitably impressed until we turn the corner of the living room and we see it. The 2 cameras set up with a light pointed at the couch. There's a guy sitting on the couch who is introduced as the other roommate. He jumps off of the couch and gives my boyfriend the same weird look. I now realize the look they were giving was disappointment. I shoot my boyfriend a very quick look of understanding, but we silently decide to continue with the tour so as to not escalate the situation. I casually joke that it's nice to have a camera so I can videotape myself for my auditions. They both laugh much too hard and say, "Yeah, that's what we were doing." He brings us over to my room and it's literally a broom closet. You wouldn't even be able to fit a single-sized bed in there. It's now patently obvious that there was never a room for rent in the first place. I take this opportunity to get out there by saying, "Oh, that's too bad. I have a queen bed and I won't be able to fit." "Okay, well, thanks for your time." We get out to the street and walk around the corner without saying a word. When we finally look at each other, it's in this stunned silence. He just hugged me really tight and we went for a walk in the park.